Okay, I'm still, there's the question, I wonder if I have it on a slide, that Rick asked, the big question that was very detailed about goals. Did I put it on a, I don't know that I put it on a slide here. Maybe I just found it. Okay, so in the question, then this was when Rick asked, and I spent, was it last webinar, the one before it, right, where we started to address it, having to do with setting a goal that's a challenge, having a big enough why, and but then the final sentence that we didn't really get to, and that's when I talked about deep strategy and so forth, right, 2 webinars ago. And then, but there was, there's something toward the end where the end part of it was, and then I make a step-by-step plan, kind of like a roadmap, and go for it. I'm paraphrasing a bit. So there's something I wanted to take a look at with you guys, and I said some before I started recording. I'll just say for people that are listening to the recording that today's a little bit distracting for me with July 4th and how it relates to government, and government has a lot of emotional things for me. So it might be, I wish I spent a long time preparing, but a lot of it, just my mind was kind of distracted in a way that I couldn't really get over on a day like today. Normally, I'm not that distracted, but okay, so let me give a sense of the ideas that we want to take a look at and put together. I came to a really cool question now that I really had to dig for. And if I didn't come to this question that I have on the slide, then the message would just have been, would have been very good, but it would have been limited. It wouldn't have gotten quite to the heart of the matter of the solution. So it turns out in life that preparation and context, and operating like in the context when you're trying to achieve a goal or solve a problem or whatever, are way more important than they seem. They seem like they're a little important, like there can be a little bit of use in preparing and context. But you know how there's a way that preparation starts to feel wrong fairly quickly? If you think about it, like once in a while it might not, if it's like clearly, especially if there's an event that happens on a certain date, then preparation can feel right. But if you're preparing for something where there isn't a fixed date, especially, or you're like planning to try to achieve a goal, or if you want, obviously if you want to make like a certain amount of income, then there's a way that if you're just preparing and learning, or maybe you're trying to rank a site, but it's sort of like one that you're making on your own, not for a client. Maybe it's for proof or something. But there's a way that at some point, it may or may not feel early, but I'll say like at some point kind of early, it'll start to feel like maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe I'm preparing too much, and I need to get out there and take action. And I'll remind you that it is one great way to look at taking action is you take action as part of your understanding, and that'll help you take action in a sense, and also help you see it in the right context. But putting that about taking action aside, there's a way that that preparing can feel wrong, and there's a way that digging around too much contextually, and I know that word's a little bit vague, I need to explain what I mean, but everything we're doing in alchemy, essentially, we're going farther out into the context with philosophy, ideas, success, mind, and so forth than people normally go. And the only, either we're just wrong in doing that, either I'm wrong in leading you here and you're wrong in listening and following along, or either we're wrong or most everyone else is wrong because they're not going here where we're going, right, in the world, right? And so if we're right, then it follows that looking around in the context, right, like we're doing here, and this is an illustration also of what I mean by context. If we're trying to make money, if we're trying to make our offer and do either consulting or joint venturing or both, right, as part of our money-getting strategy, which is quite wise. With most any money-getting strategy, you want to do some form of joint venturing, partnering with people that can work on it, do other things, as we'll get into in the future with Alchemy. And we've learned from experience with OMG, as we're teaching people how to do Google SEO and YouTube SEO, we found by experience and by people just having a certain type of success that yes, we're in the OMG Way group if you look at chat. Sorry, just check the questions real quick just in case I was, please let us see your, I am showing my screen now. Right, guys? I think that was, right. I think that was asked before. Right, is all the audio and visual going right now? Anyone want to post? Yeah, everything's good. Okay, good. I hear it in the question box. Okay, I just wanted to check. I realized I was kind of no place where I could see feedback just in case something was wrong. All right. So if we're trying to make money, I was saying that consulting, when we were teaching Google SEO, we actually just found out through experience, through other people's, our members' experience, how effective client SEO and consulting was as a way of monetizing, because it lets you not have to make a whole complex business. You can tackle one thing well, and it's in essence like a form of partnership or JVing. It's not exactly a joint venture, but it's kind of halfway between making your own business and working for someone, and it kind of hones in. You have to tackle less, and if you're doing consulting. So that's explaining what I mean by context. So if that's what we're going for, is increasing our income with consulting, JVing, that sort of thing, then it's going farther out into the context to take a look at mind or self-image, and especially how we know what's true, things like that, right? Even the issue of God's existence, it's way out there in the context. And there's a way that doesn't feel right. To some extent, it can feel right to a certain degree or at certain times, but then there's other times when it doesn't feel right, and yet it is right. And so this is such a big idea. If we're, to the extent that we're able to succeed with this, and I think we will, I'll talk about it now, and then maybe we'll do another webinar where we revisit it, or I might think of some things during the week. But I think I'll make a number of points here today, and then that might also just open me up and open you up, and I'll see how far I get. That'll give me feedback, even feedback of hearing myself talk, to see what else I might want to think of or cover. Let me skip back a slide where I have there's a couple of, okay, let's do a fairly simple one. Okay, I wrote here on this slide an illustration about a major revelation, control versus understanding. And there was someone that helpfully asked a question about this also in the Facebook group, the members Facebook group. And they were trying to figure out what I meant by control versus understanding in a different series. But let me, I'm going to draw something here also on the screen and show what I'm trying to get at with this idea, where I talk about in life, if you normally people go for what I call control, and instead if you go for what I call understanding, then you're going to constantly be better off. And another thing that we'll see is how by doing this we'll constantly be creating more drag, more friction for ourselves in the future, like more debt that we have to kind of pay off or whatever, however metaphor you want to look at it, or all of those. When we're trying to do what I'm going to illustrate, what I mean by control, then we'll create more drag. When we go for understanding, it might seem less directly effective in the moment, although there's a way that at this point for me, it just constantly is very quickly effective as well. So it's not really, doesn't have to be the opposite. The reason why it can seem more inefficient, especially when you're starting with doing this, is that there's a lot of context that can get filled in once and for all about what we're covering in Alchemy, the mind, goals, and just a whole number of ideas that as they get filled in, they kind of get filled in forever. And so it's a lot quicker to kind of go for understanding than if it opens up a bazillion open-ended questions for you, then it creates this kind of impossible catch-22 for you, and when you're trying to go for understanding. But because we're going to get to the foundation and build back up and fill so much in as we continue week after week here, then this is going to be so much more doable. So you can take advantage of this, where you'll end up removing drag and friction and debt, so to speak, this way, whereas you're creating more of it the wrong way. If I take out my drawing tool here, and I'm just going to draw a circle here. The color changed. Anyway, it's probably fairly visible. All right, here's my normal. Okay, here's my great diagram, but it'll still be helpful. So here's a circle, and then here's a larger circle around it. Looks like a donut, but it's not. What this shows is if the outer circle is like everything, where when you hit the outer circle, if you're hitting on things that are foundational, then that's that. And then here in the smaller circle is in a particular situation or what as you grow up in life from an infancy, and then you're older, and then you're dealing with a situation in life. Somebody makes you angry, or you're trying to just get somebody to do something or buy something from you or whatever. Then you're dealing with that situation symbolized by this smaller circle, and your mind is kind of giving you thoughts about and awareness about that situation that you're in, right? You're talking to someone, you're trying to get them to do something or buy something from you, or stop doing something that's bothering you, whatever. And what your mind is kind of saying to you sort of implicitly is, look, I have the context covered. Just focus within here. And we can really see this if we're talking to somebody else. Let's say somebody gives us advice, and we start asking them, like digging to see why that advice is really right. And this might be a little bit easier to picture with your parents. They might say, you should do this, right? You should, I don't know, get a job, or, stop trying to work for yourself and get a job, or whatever. And you were to say, well, why? And you try to dig in. As you start to dig into the context, they'll probably start to get a little bit perturbed at you and kind of warn you off, right, to some degree. And if we do this with our own minds in a situation, we can kind of feel warned off by our own mind, or we might just feel tired, or might feel like doing something else, or just like we're not making progress, right? We're not really getting that feeling of reward from our mind, because our mind can literally like hit the reward button where we feel good, or hit the pain button where we feel bad. And it's just a mechanism, but it's doing that. And ultimately what we want to do is try to, and I'm about to actually say something pretty important here, ultimately, since that is the case, what we want to do is align what our brain is rewarding us for and punishing us for with not so much what we want. It's already aligned with what we want, but we want to align it with what's actually going to be best for us, which is different than what we might want. And even if we were to think about, well, I mentioned this before, what goals maybe we really want, we're still kind of we're doing that thing that I want you to watch out for, where we break out of this circle, but we just end up in another circle. I'll use the highlight. Here we go. There we go. This is a constant pattern all over the place with philosophies, religions, or just people when they think about stuff, and they try to improve themselves. They break out of their box and into, or the circle here, and into a larger one, but they're still not foundational. So when this is going on, your brain is actually in control, right? Whoever controls the outer context, or whoever is creating or the reason for the outer context, right? We don't need to get too much into what creating means here. The simplistic meaning is fine. So if you're, and this might cause, this may or may not, but it has the potential to cause kind of a bit of an aha, or a starting bit of an aha for some people. If our brain or our mind is supposedly taking care of like the outer context, and we consciously are just focused in on like the situation in front of us, and when we're consciously focused on this smaller circle, this situation in front of us, we are exercising our free will, and we are being conscious. We're always conscious, but we can be using the fact that we're conscious, exercising free will, attention, awareness, but in a restricted way, and we hardly realize it. But right, we're just assuming that our mind has the context covered, and it's kind of telling us that. And metaphorically, it's like this is where the devil resides, is your brain saying, oh, no, I have the context covered. Let's see here. A number of examples. I mean, there's a simple, quick one with voting, right? If you're presented with two candidates, and you can think truly about which one to vote for, but whatever system is presenting those candidates to you in the first place is restricting you. It still might be worthwhile to pick between one of them, because one of them, you're going to be better off with one of them, and you're not doing anything wrong one way or the other. In that case, you don't really have a chance to deal with the context. It's like realistically, at least for now, right? Maybe in the greater long term of things you do, but it's a good metaphor for how your brain works and your situation in life. With our own mind, we do have a chance to dig in and get foundational and take over the context instead of just the content or the inner circle. So and what's one of the things that's going to happen that I can quickly relate back to like consulting and making money for yourself, joint venturing, is that we can build a core for ourselves, or you could say a foundation, whatever, where we're going to be so much better to deal with. We're going to have an easier time fulfilling on our agreements, being clear up front, just kind of being calm. One thing that's quite contextual, here's a good one, is a place where people often don't look in terms of increasing their efficiency with making money and dealing with people, is that people feel like it's completely kind of safe and quarantined to have thoughts in their head that can be like judgmental or negative towards a person that they're, let's say, working with or in a relationship with. And it turns out that there's quite an opportunity there, that if you're able to get to the bottom of that and not have that going on just in your own head, that it's like a shortcut or an advantage where you will interact with people in a way where you'll be more effective. It'll be easier, that they won't pick up these certain kind of negative vibes from you. And it can be subtle, but really make a difference. Like there could just be certain things you don't do or don't say that you would realize to do if you weren't thinking negatively. There'll just be these little passive-aggressive dings that'll go in there and so forth. By default, we really all act passively aggressively to a significant degree, but we can rebuild things so we mostly don't do that, and that will give us such an advantage, a real, genuine, powerful, actual, practical advantage in our consulting and joint venturing, and in the sales for that sort of thing, the getting in the door in the first place with either one of those and then maintaining it. That it's going to turn out strategically that you will always, to the extent that there's competition, you will, and I'm speaking from a lot of experience for this. Also, it'll make logical sense. You can just constantly zoom past any competition, to the extent that it exists in the first place, by going further out into the context than they realize to go, and or by preparing better. So between preparation and getting advantages in the outer context where they're not looking, to the extent that exists, then you can just always win, basically. Like the other person might like have it start out temporarily way ahead of you, but if you're focused, then you'll catch up and exceed them in most every case. Sometimes, of course, practically speaking, their advantage will be so great already that you might not exceed them. But with anything that you need to just do practically, and like in practice in life, just mundanely, if we can have a successful romantic relationship and if we can make some money, then life is pretty good and easy. Like at that point, anything else, what else do we want to do? There's not really any other place where there's like necessary competition either, where it's really going to be a problem, right? And I'm talking about outside of just being like kind of physically attacked. That's kind of a separate issue. But and then with making money and with getting a romantic relationship, then those are the only places where you really would have competition that matters in the first place, even possibly. And there's plenty of fish in the sea and money and ways to make money that you don't have to like be the top of the world. You don't have to be the most attractive guy or girl in the world, practically speaking. You don't have to be the best in your field in order to make plenty of money, right? And you certainly don't have to be the best overall. So practically speaking, you can always greatly excel and just get everything you need with both money and romance. And then friends is even easier, right? If you can do that, then obviously it's easy to make enough friends you can be happy, happy and so forth. And then with things like health and fitness, there's some competition, right? You don't have to beat anyone. It's just about with your own self-discipline and so forth. So whatever areas you look at, if you're competing as a hobby, then that's kind of supposed to be fun in and of itself, right? So again, just practically speaking, you don't need to be the top 10th of the top 1% in either to make plenty of money or to find a wonderful person that you click with and have a romance with them. And I'm not saying you need to have romance in your life. I'm just saying that for many people, they want that. And so, and I'm just saying at least, right? I'm just saying something kind of simple and obvious. At least if you can take care of those things. And the reality is that to the extent that there's no competition outside of that's relevant. And then within those two things, all you need to do is understand preparation and how to go out and accumulate advantages within the greater context. And we're doing that now. You're going to get such an advantage from going through alchemy with preparation and context in life that money getting and to the extent that you are still looking to have more romance either within your relationship or finding somebody, it's just going to be so doable and easy. There's not going to be competition that's going to be relevant because again, there's so much out there anyway. You don't need to just get one. There's not like one person we all have to compete over, right? Or one place to get money that we all have to compete over. There's so many options that you only have to just not be bad at it or whatever. But it just remains true that and just this one idea is just huge for you that you can just always blow past so much of the competition so that it's not going to matter anyway if there's still one or two or a few people ahead of you, right? Even the top 10th of the top 1% of money getting, that's still, even in the United States, let's say there's 200,000 adults, just to round off, then 1 in 1,000, just because I'm talking, I could normally do this in my head easily, but 200 or 200 million, right? Divided by 1,000. Geez, I mean that's 200,000 people in the top 10th of the top 1% of income apparently. Unless I made a mistake there somehow. It's hard to do math while you're talking because talking is like auditory and math is more of a different type of thinking than that. But you see, I mean, 200,000 people can be in the top, top 10th of the top 1% of income. So you don't have to like edge out the top 5 people. You don't even have to edge out the top 1,000 people or the top 100,000 people. Apparently, 200,000 people. And of course, you can be just very happy without even hitting that. But just to give you a sense, and so you can pretty much easily get like in that range, or even the top 10%, right? You're very stable. You can be happy. There studies have shown apparently that at about $70,000 a year, it plateaus out in terms of you're not really happy or past that. I'm not claiming that's the case or not, but anyhow. So it's just preparation and context, and I'm dead sure of that, both from experience and from logic. That's it. That's the entire secret to never having to worry about the competition, even if to the extent there is competition. I mean, you can see things in an even deeper way where you pretty much ignore the competition anyway. You know, like I say, as long as there's a problem to be solved economically, then obviously there's not competition that's relevant, or else they would have already solved it, right? You might have heard me say that. But so that's kind of even deeper. But even to the extent that you do feel like you have to beat out people, then it's just easy in that way. I'm not saying it doesn't take focus and dedication and so forth, but that's the path, is do more preparation and operate more for advantages in the context. In a very restricted situation, like if there's a game where, like chess, where it's so non-open, then there's not really a point. Like apparently the way to do better in chess is you just basically memorize more and just have more of a frame. The chess masters basically just have more of a framework for memorizing more moves and so forth. So it's pretty much just a linear thing. Who's willing to focus and do stuff that's going to cause them to memorize more chess? People say it's a strategic game, but it really isn't. It's very misleading. My understanding of strategy or deep strategy is you're finding these openings in the context where you build up and just make things easier and easier until you just reach out and grab what you wanted to grab or pick the fruit you wanted to pick and so forth. I'm talking about 2 or 3 kind of related ideas here, and it might get a little bit scattered, but we'll unscatter it either today or next time to whatever degree it might need to be unscattered. So there's that idea about strategy that relates to context. Then there's this idea of control versus understanding that relates to context, where let's think of things where we want to control. So normally what people do in interacting with others is easy to see this. Oh, and this is the same thing with interacting with your own mind. Like if you want to get yourself motivated to do a task, then what you can do, instead of just trying to like use willpower to get yourself going, you can think about it like operating in terms of understanding or operating on the context of the situation. Now, the first thing I will try to do if I'm just trying to do a task is just try to sit down and do it, because of momentum, right? That is, in essence, operating on the context. One part of the context is just, all right, let me just try to sit down and do it. And when you get started, you need to go for it. But then there's a way that if you kind of sit down and force yourself to do something and it kind of is unpleasant and forced, then part of the issue, what might happen is that it gets encoded in your mind. If you're kind of feeling pain or boredom about it or whatever kind of frustration, then if you're feeling that while doing a task, whenever you feel any kind of unpleasantness or pain, your mind is going to look at what's unique in the situation, and it's going to associate that with more pain, and it's going to maybe be even harder in the future to get yourself to work. If you do it and you really find yourself enjoying it and in flow, then that'll work to your benefit and you'll have an easier time doing it in the future. But if while you're doing it, you feel yourself kind of not liking it and complaining while you're doing it, then that can backfire in the future. Sometimes in life you just have to do something no matter what because of deadlines, and often what's going on, if you look, is someone else is kind of forcing you into that situation, or you're letting them believe that you're forced into it when you aren't really. I'm giving you a little bit some building blocks. I'm not fully yet necessarily giving you every solution, but I'm giving you kind of bits and pieces that you can take into account in any particular situation. But there's other ways to operate on the context and to understand the situation if you're trying to do a task And this is particularly helpful with other people. And the more you help find ways to get yourself motivated in a way that leads to more motivation in the future, that leads to a task becoming more like pleasant, or then you also get better at doing that with others. If you're used to just kind of forcing yourself to work, then it's going to be more natural and easy for yourself to kind of use that kind of control and force with others. Even just kind of giving them that signal, like, look, I'm about to get pissed here. Just do what I want. Or just drop that topic. Just don't talk to me anymore about that. Whatever it might be. So again, the more you do that with your own mind, the more it'll kind of be easy to do that with other people in a unproductive way. And the more you find ways to understand your own mind and lead your mind, and it'll feel like leading yourself, right? Leading yourself to want to do things that are good for you, then the more you will naturally do that with others, and they'll really like that. And it'll be quite easy to make money, especially once you're started. A lot of people, they have this kind of stop and start thing with money. They'll get going, but then things won't snowball. Instead, they'll like blow up, or at least turn into a slog. I've found that we're going to opportunities will come up in life. If we think about with dating and romance, then most everyone's going to have someone that at some point is going to be attracted to them, and that'll pop up at least every so often, where they meet someone and they'll have a chance with somebody to start things. And so it can certainly be good to have more traffic. I get that, more opportunities, and with joint venturing or with romance or whatever, but it's never going to solve your problem. And if the traffic is at some kind of at least survival level, or where you have some chances, then the real opportunity, or the place where you're going to really get a lot of bang for your buck, is if you can not have things blow up and not have things get stopped up. And so the more we get used to this control versus understanding, the more you just let the context kind of get decided outside of your awareness, and the more you just operate within the circle that you're given, and try to control within that circle rather than look outside to understand. Both methods can ultimately lead to getting what you want within this circle. But if you're willing to understand and get to the context, then you could phrase it like, now you control the context. And then you build up to where you get what you want. But now you get it from a very solid way. Let's say you want someone to do something. If you understand them and their preferences and their talents and things that they don't like, and also even just understand things that could be going on that are in their life that's temporary. And sometimes it can be better just to wait a week because somebody is going through something, or they have a project that's more on their mind, right, or whatever it might be. The more you understand, the more you can find the timing and the framing, and maybe give them a little, like ask them a little more to do one thing, and you a little bit more do something else, rather than what your first inclination might have been. All right, you, my partner, you go do this task, and I'll take care of this task. But maybe if you understand yourself and them even better, you would realize not to split it up that way, but instead there's aspects of the task that they were going to do that you could do better, and there's aspects of what you were going to do that they could do better. Or maybe there's nothing about what you're going to do that they could do better, and you still do all of what you're going to do, but you have a pretty easy time helping with a couple of aspects of their task. And then they could do a much better job with the rest of it, and the whole thing works out better, and then you win and they win anyway. And it's not about fairness, right? It's about everyone's just better off anyway, so that's good. And then you snowball, right? And you'll get more, and then maybe the project is done better, so you have less to do in the future anyway. So it still ends up, better and better and better. That's what I mean by control, or that starts to explain what I mean by control versus understanding, and learning to think in this way. And to start, one thing you can do is start to notice more this week, and you might have already noticed this because of other things we've talked about, but how what we think of as using our free will, and it is, but it can be restricted within just the decisions that we're given by our brain. I've used a metaphor in the past about, imagine that you're president, and this particularly has nothing to do with politics, just a cool illustration. Imagine you're president of whatever, could be a company, all right, and you have advisors. You could be making decisions, correct? You could actually be making decisions, but if all the information you were given and on the only decisions you are making is what you're presented with from those advisors, then they're controlling the context, right? And you are making decisions. You can still use your smarts, your free will, and so forth, and be making decisions, but it's all within a context that's dictated by your advisors, and you're only right with the facts that you're given by the advisors and with just the decisions themselves that you're given. And that's like how by default, that's how it's going to work with you in your mind, is that you'll just see the decisions that it gives you and rely on the and when I say context, like if somebody cuts you off and your mind says to you, do you want to honk? Do you want to honk at that jerk or not? Right? Then it's presupposing that the person's a jerk, right? And it's just you get to decide whether to honk or not. You see, and so you're being controlled in the sense of you don't have the option to think about whether the person's a jerk. You see, and then that can come up when you're working with somebody, and you're like, man, they're a jerk for this. How do I respond? And you're just operating, trying to control within what you're given, where you're given the idea that this person's a jerk, they're wrong, they're on life, they're being unfair, they're doing this, that, and the other thing. And how do you respond given that? So again, your brain's controlling the context, and you are just trying to feel like control within this what you're given. So it's not really about control or not. That's why it's in quotes. You'll get more control by seeking and learning and understanding into the context, getting foundational, and then building back up solidly. Then you actually are taking control. That's the irony. But it can feel, you're going to feel out of control when you go outside of this circle and start to delve in the context. Now I have a cool question for you. Why would you feel like you're losing control of the situation, or giving up control, or just a general feeling of panic or unease or wrongness as you start to delve into the context that your mind is giving you? Why would you feel that way? I can go here in case anyone's typing, but you don't have to necessarily answer or not. I can remove this. Although I might need it later, so I'll keep it for a moment. Loving the concept of leading and motivating your mind in a way that makes particular tasks more enjoyable the next time. Aha moment. I'm very glad. Excellent. Oh, that's so cool, Jen. Kind of interesting how much Google search results create. Yeah, context for many people, for sure. Absolutely. Right. And you can start to think more and more about how the context gets decided. I mentioned this with media, right? Like people say, oh, I don't believe the media. I think for myself. Well, or just about life. People say that they think for themselves, but the culture at large and the ideas that seeped in between your own family culture and then culture at large, that's dictating the context. You're only thinking for yourself within that context. Even if you think you're picking what appeals to you more, it's still within the context. It's still it's appealing to you because of assumptions that you're not choosing. And I haven't forgotten my basic question. Aha moment, control, and I know I have this. I guess I can just erase this diagram at this point. Okay, I guess I can reproduce that diagram. That awesome drawing at will, right? Aha moment, and so I haven't forgotten my question about why does it feel like wrong to delve into the context. If you partner with someone, then things will work very well when you define between the two parties what you're better at, so the tasks are being split into the correct areas where you contribute best. Absolutely. And in practice, people don't really do that because there's things blocking it. Like, it seems like common sense, except for its occluded. Like there's other things by the context that we're not really realizing to ask this type of question because people are thinking about what's fair, right? Again, people just think in terms of tasks rather than they might not realize to use alchemy with a task and break it into its even more core components, right? Like someone could think, oh, you do the sales letter, but actually one person might do a video, like with Mike and myself. Mike might do a video and help with some of the graphics and layout, and I might work on the general text of things, right, and the seed information. Dave Keyes wrote, I've caught myself presuming a false context more than once lately. Exactly. Neil said it's new information. Yeah, I find giving up control gives it back. Right. Yeah, when it's done correctly, where we, especially when we figure out later larger context. Right. There's so many options within the larger context can feel overwhelming. True. That's right, Faith. You might fear losing control. Boundaries and limited choices make us feel more comfortable. Faith said, basically because the ego is about situational, narrow, and routine control. When you move beyond ego, identity can feel ungrounded, where in actual fact you are expanding your identity by way of context into a more creative space. That's right. Afraid of the false paradigm. It's a real problem. See, listen, I'm going to say something. I might have mentioned it, touched on it before, but it's there's an idea that you can delve into that's fascinating. And it opens up a whole field of inquiry that I think you can have fun with. You see, we identify with our mind. Our mind is not conscious. The irony is, in a sense, what actually happens in a way, this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but it's kind of funny and true in a certain way. It's like we identify with our mind, and it's like our mind identifies with us. Our mind thinks it's conscious, and we kind of like think we're not, or we think conscious is something that basically ends up not being conscious at all. So we identify with our brains identify with us, and we all get it backwards constantly. It's like two people looking out of each other's eyes. If you had like a hookup where there was cameras and you saw out of the other person's eyes, and you started to think you were the other, each of you thought you were the other one. And it would just be very odd and confusing, and you'd have all these things get opposited and tangled, right, because of that. That's how it is with you and your brain. So when you consciously try to delve into the context, you're kind of like delving into your brain's territory, and it doesn't, in essence, it doesn't want that. I don't know how much sense that makes, but basically your brain is getting perturbed, and you think you're your brain, so you feel perturbed. You see? So your brain is, what's going to happen is your brain is going to be giving up control. Your mind is going to be giving up control. And in its own way, remember, it's not conscious, so it's not like intentional, but as a mechanism, it's going to feel like, or not feel, but give signals of being disturbed about that. Until there's a way to break all the way through it, where it gets switched right, where you don't identify with your mind in the same way. But as long as you identify with your mind, then if you consciously are taking over the context and control, your mind is losing control. But then you're identifying with your mind, which is losing control, so you feel like you're losing control. Your mind will start to feel more confused and so forth. So it's like an irony that you'll feel a wrongness by trying to delve into the context and seek control. And here's another way of looking at it. If the context is correct, if your mind has, thank you, well put, I appreciate that. If your mind has the context right, like if its deep understanding of the world is all correct, and I guarantee you it's not, right? But if and of course, where is your mind is just a compilation of external culture, right? Where did it come from? Plus a little bit of you operating, in a restricted circle, right? Until and unless we break all the way through. So unless like culture has all good ideas in it, which it couldn't, or else there wouldn't be so many problems. Anyhow, if your mind was totally correct, then poking around in there would be pointless and counterproductive. So this is another thing that's going on, is your mind, by its nature, believes that it's correct. In one way of thinking, overconfidence of your mind is like the problem. Overconfidence about context. Because your brain developed as you were growing up to make meaning, to make a sense of foundation out of thin air, basically, like out of your brain doesn't really know what's going on. It's just getting inputs. And so it doesn't, like when you're 1 year old, your brain didn't understand about how the entire world and universe and everything, existence works. Didn't start out knowing, right? So what does it start out? It starts out just getting inputs, right, when you're 1 year old or 0 years old or whatever. From those inputs, it needs to make some sort of sense out of the world for your body and your mind to survive, right? Like you need to move forward and do something. So the way your brain actually functions by default is to give you a sense of reality and foundation and meaning and sense to the world in the absence of having it. So it doesn't get truth, it gets inputs. The inputs are actually inputs, right? Like they're true as inputs. But your mind starts making this idea of what's true out there just based on these inputs, right? Like light waves and sound waves and so forth. By the time that you're old enough to start to know better, it's been so many years of this sense of reality by machine, but like reality by your brain, this sense of reality and certainty about how the world works, created like kind of like thin air, so to speak. So the whole way your brain works by default is to make you feel like reality is real, like its version of reality is real and foundational, so that you can move forward and take action and survive. But that was all to get you started. I've referred to this a little bit, in different ways. I keep saying this in different ways because it's so fundamental. It's so important. When you fully get this, which you may already have, then the game changes. So it's like a rocket, one of those old rockets going into outer space, and has the starter jet or whatever packs that it jettisons. But then people never jettison it because this feeling that by your mind that the context is handled, right? That guy's a jerk. What do you want to do about it? You don't think to really question whether the guy is really a jerk in some cases. There might be times when you've questioned whether someone's a jerk, but there's probably been lots of times when you didn't. Or whether they're a good person. There's all kinds of things where people are like, oh, that person's a good person. Good people appear a certain way. And there's times when maybe it would be better to have a different view than just simplistically whether someone's a good person or not. That could get us screwed in any number of ways, right? Oh, they're a good person. They wouldn't do this. They wouldn't do that. Maybe in some context they're a good person. Maybe they would fit the definition of a good person, but maybe they would still screw you in various ways. And maybe you need to have a theory of mind and life where you can take all that into account properly. And maybe you could have operated in a different way where they wouldn't have screwed you, right? So this idea, oh, this person's a good person, right, and there's something called a halo effect, for example, right? A halo, like an angel halo. And there's the reverse of it, where if you start out with a positive impression of somebody, then that will color your future thoughts about that person. Because why? Now you can imagine that diagram again, where the context gets restricted. You're operating within a certain circle in which that person is basically good. They're in a certain category, and you interpret everything that way. And so it's called a halo effect, where this is even, professors have seen this with grading papers. If you have multiple, but you can apply this to your client consulting or getting clients or anything like that. The first, obviously people know first impressions are important, but sometimes people don't really carry that forward as much. Like, I'll just give you an example from college, and you could see how it's counterintuitive. If you have like an essay test and there's multiple essays, then you should go out of order. People will often go in order. Even if you can choose a few, you should actually go out of order and write the answer to the question that you're most confident and have the most details about first. Right? If there's 4 questions and that's number 3. You put it first out of order and then answer question 1 and 2. Because of the halo effect, you'll get a different grade. And this has been measured and measured and measured with experiments. It's very powerful. And it's kind of shocking. And it shows how arbitrary grades can be and so forth. So you're going to have the same thing with your clients and so forth. That it's not just your first impression. It's then kind of the first major set of communications and so forth. You need to get yourself in a good category. And then what I make sure to do with people is I'm very careful to try to keep it clean. What I mean is you don't have to do everything great, but you don't want to do anything that's going to cause them to jump you out of the halo category, if that makes sense. So I pay really close attention with people to not, ideally to like never do something where it like totally flips them about me, where like you can also think of it in terms of benefit of the doubt. And I plan to get to this as well when I talk about relationships in the future, but this gives you a sense of what I know about relationships and the way that I look at things, is I think of it in terms of benefit of the doubt, or the way that there are these categories, or when you understand context, is the context is so important that I stay in the us, or the benefit of the doubt category, and you don't have to hit a home run after home run or grand slam after grand slam to stay there. But what you have to do is not do something that's going to cause you to get recategorized by the person, where you no longer have the benefit of the doubt. And so I'm very aware and careful about that, and it's very helpful. I get a lot out of it. In terms of practical tactics, that's probably the thing that's it's very plausible that that's like my number one money-getting tactic, is to get on the benefit of the doubt side with people and not lose that benefit of the doubt with partners and customers, everything. Let me make sure I'm sticking around here. So I'm talking about control and understanding. I was talking about how your mind can make you feel perturbed as you start to like question things and so forth, and how you can be truly using your free will and your willpower and your conscious awareness and still be controlled in the sense that you're within a pen. You're within like an enclosure, and you're only free within that enclosure. And I would assert that outside of my help, that's generally what I see everyone doing. And myself still to some degree, and I was there, but alchemy is about breaking out of that. Where and the irony is, again, it'll feel like, or it might not. Maybe we've done this in a way where for many of you, it feels just good all the way through. But it can also feel like, why are we going in this direction? And it's hard, in one sense, to sell up front to people on doing this. Like every single person that is eligible to do alchemy should really be listening, and maybe a lot are. There's lots of people consuming it. But if anyone's missing out on it, it's to the extent like that it can look almost not relevant to go looking out into the context. Let's see here. But it's the only way to get real control, is to actually seek understanding and then circle back around. And then you get control the right way, rather than trying to maintain a feeling or sense of control. And so here's another look at the irony. So how do you get a feeling of control if you're identifying with your brain and your brain's identifying with you, or especially if you're identifying with your brain? That's the main thing. If you're identifying with your brain, then how do you feel like you're in control? If your brain is controlling you being a conscious being, if your brain is keeping you enclosed in a small area, keeping you in your box, then you'll feel good. Because you're identifying with your brain. Your brain's giving you reward for staying within your box, and a sense of unease or even pain or a headache or just putting you to sleep, like putting itself to sleep or whatever, if you try to go out. That it can be a process and a struggle and effort to reverse that, but you reverse all that, and I can testify to you that to a large or full degree it's possible, then, and that's what we're of course doing together, then that's the wonderful thing. So again, people feel a sense of control, and when it's very narrow, we call that obsessive compulsive disorder, right, if it's too narrow. But really, people that don't supposedly have obsessive compulsive disorder, it's only because the circle that their brain allows them to operate within, the conceptual circle or, in their lives, is large enough that it's normal. When you see things properly, it's like everybody has acute OCD. But it's only the ones that have it even more acute than normal that look like they have OCD. But we maintain a sense of control by letting our brain control us, and only exercising our free will within the sphere that our brain allows. None of it's intentional. Your brain's not a person doing this to you on purpose. It's just a mechanism that's there as a starter kit to keep you alive long enough to get things right, like we're doing now. And doing this will, and has been, my whole secret to money getting personally. Definitely you can make money without doing all this, of course. And on the surface, it can seem quicker. But I also see people imploding and having so many problems in so many ways with their money getting itself or with other areas of their lives. Or they're just not really enjoying it, even if they're claiming that they're living out their passion, right, and so forth. But then somehow they're getting angry at people, and themselves and plenty, even though they claim to be passionate and happy. I'm a little bit less doing what I'm passionate about. Unfortunately, the things I'm passionate about aren't really things that people are looking to pay for directly. But I'm quite happy, and my business is quite secure. My only fear ever about business is just a direct strike by government in some way, right? Where, there's just so many rules and regulations that you can't even find. And then with the American system of government and the English system of government, even if you found the regulations, that's not enough, because it's all built on case law. So you have to actually read cases that are decided, and that is still could be overturned in an actual case by a judge. And so there's literally no way to comply with the law in America, for sure. You can get it approximated enough where it's unlikely for you to have a problem, and I'm working on doing that, and I've always worked on doing that. And another thing you can do is, which I do, is operate in a way where you don't enrage people, and people are mainly on your side, right? I figure one of the main, like people will create a lot of enemies on the way to the top often, or people that are angry at them. But I figure, and this relates to an idea about bottlenecks that I was thinking of talking about. I figure the real bottleneck or predictable issue I could run into is not the problem isn't that I need more and more success. The only problem I could really run into is a real big setback. And at that point, I want to make sure that there's lots of people that want to give me a hand up at that point, and a lot of people that even might want to, not only because of caring, that's great, absolutely, and then on top of it, if they're just their income, like if their self-interest is based upon me doing well rather than me doing badly, like I want as many people as possible, or maybe not as many, but a good cushion of people that it's their self-interest for me to do well and not have setbacks, and also where they care and they're not enraged at me and they don't dislike me so much that even if it's in their self-interest, they'd still want to kick me on the way down. But I think about that, like for real, where look, predictably, when you have a business, you're going to run into issues, even just on a level with one client or with an individual relationship with a partner. Something could come up, and I want to make sure that I have so much kind of momentum or vector, more like, not even momentum, but like vectors, things in my favor with that person, that we can get through, little issues or misunderstandings that might come up. Or with a client, just out of your control, a website might bounce around, right, with Google and updates and so forth. And so you want to have as much benefit of the doubt as possible to deal with, with things like that when there's an issue. Okay. Great. Let me think here. Let me go back to this original slide. So I'll maybe have us just take a look at this for a moment, almost as the question rather than talking much, and then I'll go also to the discussion. And I might leave this a little bit open for further discussion, like in another webinar. So I could have just said, listen, guys, preparation and context is important. And that would have been correct and useful and good to say. But there's a deeper question that after thinking about it this week, I finally arrived at, which is, and even another question I want to ask that's very practical, that helps us take advantage of the idea that preparation and context is good, so that in practice it'll help you. It's one thing for me just to be right, but what I'm also trying to do in Alchemy is actually make a difference, right, where you guys are having an actual practical difference. Everything I do that's deep is for a practical reason. I think it's, again, the most practical thing to do is deal with these topics. But anyhow, what's going to make the rubber hit the road for you is succeeding with this issue, this question: how do I, of course meaning you or me individually, we're asking ourselves, how do I make preparation and context feel right? Right? And when I say context feel right, I mean operating in the context, what I'm trying to achieve, a goal. And I referenced the question that Rick asked that I focused on 2 webinars ago, about how he's always been taught to go over goals. And the whole method, the whole thing that he elaborated on was reasonable, but it left various things out and assumed certain things. And the whole idea that you make a step-by-step plan, there's the bottleneck and a linear issue that I want to get to, but related to that is what I'm talking about, is the step-by-step plan, like almost like a roadmap, he said, that metaphor or mental model of looking at goal achievement in this very physical world movement sort of way tends to make us not think about the greater context very much, right? Like if I'm trying to figure out how to navigate to a goal, if I think that's what goal achievement is like navigating in physical space, and that's where I metaphorically develop my model, my strategy and stuff, my tactics. Then I think, all right, well, I have to get from point A to point B, and there might be like pitfalls, there might be twists and turns, right? We've even seen those diagrams, and it's helpful. I like those diagrams. I don't have it at hand. I might have it on a slide for next time now that I thought of it. But you might have seen it. It's been posted in some of the groups here, where it's like our plan is that we bicycle, like going up a hill from point A to point B, but the actual reality is not like this straight line up a hill. There's like a pitfall here, there's like a sand trap and a water trap, and then there's like an obstacle here and a fence and so forth. That's what actually happens. Well, the reality is actually even deeper than that, in terms of if you want to consistently come out way ahead in terms of strategy and competition, then you want to rise above even thinking of strategy, really even if you're thinking in terms of the pitfalls that you're going to encounter and so forth, and obstacles. There's a way that you're still going to be thinking in terms of like surface tactics instead of deep strategy on the way to a goal. And someone that thinks in terms of deep strategy will pretty much consistently way outperform someone that just thinks in terms of the tactics to overcome the pitfalls and the obstacles. So in as a more of an illustration here, in Sun Tzu's Art of War, that's a particularly good book. He still ignored the greater context in life. I mean, his fundamental assumption is that you're a samurai obeying whatever orders that your lord comes up with, right? That's pretty sick way to look at life, right? Is just obeying orders of an arbitrary person. So he still was in just a greater circle, but there's a certain thing about the way he looks at strategy that's pretty cool. And to oversimplify, but in kind of a helpful and quick and dirty way right now, in Sun Tzu's Art of War, you could imagine it was about kind of like winning battlefield fights, right? Like you're looking at like feudal Japan and like winning, right? And so you would have your army, right? And normally, and Sun Tzu did not do this, but normally if you think in terms of winning, And now I'm making a parallel to this kind of tactical, like the naive way of looking at achieving a goal is, I'll do it here, is like you start here and then your goal is here. And then, I remember I'm doing this with the mouse, so it's hard to even do straight lines for me. I don't have much practice. But it's like point A here and point B, and this is naive. And then the kind of meme that's out there is that actually it's more like there's a pitfall here, and then there's like a fence here that you have to get over, and then there's like another pitfall with like some sharks in it here, you know, and so forth. And I'm saying there's an even way to look at the even greater context, okay? And also being careful, not necessarily just going out one more box or one more context out, although this might be enough to beat most of the competition if that's all you have to do, is going out kind of one way. Actually, that really might just be enough, actually. So that actually might be valid. Depending on what you're trying to do. You don't have to always, in many cases in life, you don't have to win by 1,000 miles if winning by 10 miles is enough. All right, I'm talking about Sun Tzu's Art of War, and Sun Tzu's Art of War is more like this. It's more like going out here, which is good. Okay. Another book on tactics, we might suppose that Sun Tzu's Art of War, if he was talking about how he wins all the time in feudal Japan, that he might be talking about, listen, what you need to understand is that horsemen are countered by spearmen, but spearmen are weak to swordsmen, and so you want to have, like with Alexander. Alexander the Great had this, I believe, if I have my history right, it had like a phalanx formation that was extremely effective, and he just beat everybody with it until he lost to somebody. Might have been fuzzy at that point, either in Russia or in, usually there's people lose in Russia, right? These Europeans get to Russia and everything falls to pieces. Or else maybe it was Hannibal, but I think I'm mixing things up there. But anyhow, that was tactically, that might be what you expect, right? Is you invent this, well, I guess it's hard to say whether that's actually going out. In a sense, that's kind of going out into the context, at least by one thing removed. And if you do that and your opponent doesn't, then you'll win, right? Like if your opponent, Alexander the Great might have just been fighting people that were like literally naive, like their sense of battle was like you pick up your axe and start screaming, right, and run into battle. If that's the case, then viewing things kind of one more step out, where you're in a phalanx formation and you have the right weapons that go with that and your practice and so forth, then you're going to win, right? And would say you're a great tactician as long as that's working. But what you would do to beat Alexander is you just go another circle out into the context. And in life, this tends to constantly be possible. And as I said, you really only have to particularly deal with competition to the extent that you have to deal with it at all when it comes to either maybe romance and maybe making money, right? And outside of that, it's pretty hard to imagine what. I guess if there's some kind of particular infighting situation in your social group or your family or something, maybe there's that. But you're pretty much always going to win if you just go a circle or two outside in context and preparation compared to whoever you're competing against. And as I said, this isn't just like me theorizing. This is just what I do nonstop. And it just works and works and works. So you might have expected I was saying that Sun Tzu wrote about how to counter various formations and stuff like that. But Sun Tzu didn't really write about that. Instead, what Sun Tzu said was that basically that if you know yourself, then you're way better off than if you don't. And then if you know yourself and like if one of you really understands yourself, one general really has good self-knowledge, and the other general doesn't, then the general with good self-knowledge is going to tend to win. And then he says, if both people understand themselves, then if you understand yourself, he might have reversed it. He might have started by saying, if you know your enemy, if you understand your enemy, then, and your opponent doesn't, then you're going to win. But then if you understand your enemy and yourself, then you'll defeat a guy that just understands, one of those. And then if you understand your enemy, how your enemy's mind works, and how your own mind works, including, your shortcomings, your strengths, And then if you understand the terrain, and then if you can pick the terrain, then you're going to win. And see that even supersede. He didn't even really talk about like whether horsemen beat spearmen or or whatever, or lose to spearmen, and then swordsmen beat spearmen and such, and where archers fit into that, and when to deploy which, and so forth. He focused on things like knowing yourself, knowing your enemy, knowing the terrain, and choosing the terrain, and things like that. And that's kind of a tangible example of what I mean by going further out into context, where the other generals of the time presumably weren't really thinking about knowing their own minds, knowing their opponent's minds, knowing the terrain. They would be more thinking about like getting their troops in better shape, right? Even something like having good morale, you can think in terms of, oh, I want my troops to have better morale, but then you can go out into context with morale itself. So one general of an army might be thinking, all right, I want my troops to have better morale, so I'm going to give them a rousing speech. But another general might think, all right, well, I'll give them a rousing speech, but I also am going to make sure they're well fed, make sure they have good footwear, make sure they have some days off, and more and more things that help their morale. And I might make sure to just try to pick my battles in a way that we appear to win and have good feedback about whether we won. Oh, even that, right? Even we might win, but we want to feel like we're winning, right? Which is the case when you're trying to make money. It's not enough to be doing actions that are helpful. You need to also have a sense that you are confident that your actions are helpful. And it's another thing that I designed in OMG was ways that you could feel like confidence in the information and the actions that you were taking based on information, and be able to double check and go on Monday with Greg and say, listen, this is what I'm doing. Can you verify that that's correct? Because when you're trying to do search engine optimization, then it's really easy to feel like, oh, I could be screwing something up. So I want to make sure people can come and check on that. So they felt confidence that they're doing something right, because that's going to improve morale, right? More than, of course, we can be positive and support each other, which we do, which also improves morale. But I wanted to have several factors, all of which help improve morale and help break bottlenecks to morale. So that helps to even further talk about what I mean by preparation and context. And I wrote down here, I gave kind of a longer, more elaborate paraphrase of this, what I'm saying, and I divided it into two questions. One is, how do I make preparing, and sometimes just waiting, feel like I am making maximally efficient progress? Before I read the second one, if you're investing, then having some of your money, or even a lot of it, just in cash, ready to take advantage of a good opportunity. I'm not trying to give investment advice or anything like that here, but it's an easy way to illustrate it, right? But I do the same thing in how I design OMG and just how I design things month by month and so forth. I don't sit around trying to think, how do I maximize, how do I wring every last minute out of the people that are doing the coaching and working with me, my partners. How do I make sure everyone's doing the most they could be doing all the time? I don't think that at all. I'm happy to roughly have people operating at like 70% of what they could be doing for OMG. They can operate at whatever percentage they want in their own business that they're also doing. But I don't try to have things maxed out because and this is something I plan to develop. I'll probably look to develop it next time, and then I'm really close to getting into directly looking at the method for how to know what's true. But just kind of wrapping up a few things here, like we're doing with strategy, goals in mind. And then as we get into the even more foundational stuff, then we can revisit some about strategy, goals in mind in light of it. But I'll see what I decide to talk about next time specifically. But opportunities in life are alinear. They're not just linear. They're not just the same amount each day. And so it's really much more efficient to keep some capacity open to take advantage of like the big fish or the big opportunities that come in, and just to be rested for those, and things like that. Rather than you're going to get more bucks, more stuff that you're trying to get, whatever, dollars, doing things that way, often by far, than like if you're sitting around at 70% and ready to take advantage of the big thing that comes by, they can give you like 100 times the rewards. for a little while, then that's better than trying to just max out to 100% all the time. People say, oh, my schedule's all full, or I'm giving it 110% all the time. And I don't really try to give everything 110%. I try to be aware and ready to understand and leap at the right things, and then give it 100%, or however you want to represent that. And sometimes just waiting. I mean, it can be when you're looking to get joint venture partners, clients, romantic partners. Sometimes just having the right bait or shingle hung up or signals out there. And maybe you do web design and you have your link. Right, I know somebody that did that outside of OMG. They before they got into OMG, and they were telling me how they just got a bunch of business just from doing a good job starting to design some websites, and then for people they knew, and then they would get business from the link on the website to do more. So then you're just waiting, right? You're not running out doing a whole lot to generate business, but you just have the right bait or signal or hook out there, and then it comes in. I'm not saying that needs to be your only strategy, but it's nice to think of that as kind of a baseline where if that's all you were doing, then wouldn't that be great? And then look at everything else as gravy or bonus. It's a really cool thing in life to look at part of what you do to make money as like gravy. And so it can be a lot nicer to be networking and doing and kind of stimulating stuff on purpose where you're going out and trying to get stuff. It can be nice if it feels more like gravy or bonus rather than like, okay, I'm going to go to this meeting and I'm going to get somebody at this meeting. Sometimes it's just not going to be there for you, and pushing might just have a bunch of negative. Right? Again, it's like control rather than understanding, where you're just trying to say, I'm going to get something within this restricted circle. There's going to be a client, but maybe there is no client within that circle. Maybe within the meeting you're going to go to tomorrow, or that you could even go to, but that you could even skip, maybe there is nobody there. Now, of course, maybe there is, so it could be better to go and you gain understanding and so forth, but there's always alternative use, right? A good strategist is always looking at alternative use and potential ongoing costs. If you go and it's really hard, and also if you go and you go to a networking meeting and you feel really satisfied and complacent, and because of that you don't work on ranking a website that could help you even more in the future, even for yourself, even just for proof and experience and confidence. One of the things that can happen if you fill your day with activities, I'm really careful about this in practice. This isn't just something I'm coming up with. I definitely paid attention to this, and it's been very profitable for me to do so. What I'm about to say is I'm really careful about activities that make my mind feel filled up like I did my work for the day, but that aren't necessarily the optimal activities that I could be doing. Because that's a genuine motivator, right? Like your mind, or it's a genuine demotivator that can cause drag. If you do a bunch of work and you feel like now this part of the rhythm where I can relax, and relaxation is okay. So there's nothing wrong with doing work and feeling good about it and then relaxing and feeling good about that. But the point is you don't want to have it's like a sugar rush, right? You don't want to eat empty calories, right? It's the same concept. If you eat empty calories, then you're not hungry for things that could be nutritious. I'm, of course, not saying that going to a networking meeting is empty calories. It could be the best thing you could be doing. But I want you to be strategic about it and not do it just for the sake of taking action, because that could just be like eating junk food in order to not feel hungry. Maybe it's nice to feel hungry. Then maybe you need to feel a certain amount of hunger before you're going to eat carrots and celery or whatever, kale or something, right? Maybe when you just feel a little bit hungry, you're not going to eat nutritious food. But if you feel hungry enough and you only put nutritious food in front of yourself and you're hungry enough, then you might eat that food and enjoy it. That's real, right? That can happen. Depends on the person and the situation. But you can picture that, right? That's such a good illustration, and that totally applies to work, and I think it's very easy for you to apply that to work. One of the ways that I could get myself to do work that's exactly parallel to this, that's like this, like the nutritious food, is, and I can do this with food too, is you get yourself hungry enough and you clear out the thing where right in front of your face is just the thing that's nutritious, and that's it, and then you'll eat it. Same thing with work. If you don't, and I do this just constantly. And it's part of the sacrifice I make with Alchemy is because I want to kind of once and for all do this. And I may never do this again where I do it from scratch live. I might just have the recordings and do whatever with that to help people. And but this one time at least, I'm not. One of the things I do is I don't expand business-wise or otherwise in other ways in order to keep myself focused on Alchemy and the ideas that can do and and everything. So, and again, still everything isn't as always structured as organized as I would ideally hope. But not only do I put time in, but I actually exclude eating quote-unquote work junk food. And that junk food might even make me a lot more money, but relative to having Alchemy be as successful as I'm able to reasonably make it this time, it's junk, right? Even if it would make money and have other benefits. So I have enough. One of the things I did, right, was I had such a nice launch situation and do so well with OMG is on such a good course for this year that I'm able to do that without it being a problem with my partners, right? So so I totally do that in all sorts of ways constantly. Is do that thing where I and that relates to what I was talking about with waiting, or not just jumping and taking action, not just eating food as soon as I feel hungry, metaphorically speaking. Because just one of the things that could backfire is someone could, if they don't understand what's going on, they could just feel like giving up. If they try to take all kinds of action within a restricted context that they don't realize is restricted, and they don't find any clients there or JV partners or whatever, and they can feel like giving up. When in fact, if they had expanded properly in the context and prepared enough, and even just waited, and had the right signals and hooks and bait out there, then kind of effortlessly things would come. And especially if they focused on being ready when something does come. That's a really big deal. And that relates to the alinear stuff that I want to develop. I presume I'll develop that next time. Okay. And then I'll read this last one and say any thoughts that come to mind, and then we will finish this part of the webinar, and then I'll just discuss with you a bit, and that'll be that. Okay. The other statement, the question that I wrote that was expanding on the idea of how do I make preparation and context feel right? The first sentence had to do with how do I make preparing feel efficient. The other is how do I make it so delving into the context gives me a feeling of progress rather than panic. And I think a lot of what I just have taught, this whole discussion that I've given to you for this has been helping you to see it in this way where the context, hopefully literally just from listening, the delving into context will feel like it makes more sense. But then you can make this question for yourself. You can write it down and think about it yourself. How do I, and one of the answers is going to be is not identifying with your mind when you don't want to. You can identify with your mind when you choose to, just like you can identify with a character in a movie when you choose to. But you don't want to be identifying with it at the wrong time. When you identify with you as a conscious being, when you're seeking understanding, then you'll feel good. You'll be increasing your feeling of control and so forth. But when you identify with your mind, your non-conscious mind, then you'll feel the opposite, and it won't work very well. See if anything else comes to me before I wrap up this part of the webinar. Excuse me. How do I make it so delving into context gives me a feeling of progress? You can think of it in terms of advantages, right? To the extent that it doesn't even have to be an advantage over the competition. It could be an advantage in terms of solving a problem. And if you're making money, you're solving a problem ultimately for someone else in terms of your offer, right? Your product or service. So the more you delve into context, the more you make your offer better, right? Your offer will better solve the problem that you're trying to solve, which means more ultimately snowballing business. It won't necessarily mean more initial traffic, but it'll mean probably more referral traffic and better conversions from testimonials, and a better overall offer solution to the problem by delving into context and thinking about trying to ask questions that other people aren't asking that might be relevant. And even a little bit like going to a networking meeting, everyone you talk to is not going to pay off or know someone that's going to pay off to be a client or a good partner. But every question you ask, everywhere you poke around regarding improving your own offer, isn't going to pay off. But the one that does pay off, the 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 10 that really pays off, now you're asking a question, and therefore you're going to open up a space and get answers. Might be over time, might not be instantly. That other people are not going to have, and so you're going to have a better solution and help more people. And then you're going to see, wow, that was so cool. And the more you kind of see how going into the context gives you these benefits, then that in and of itself will cause momentum. At this point in my life, I have so much momentum with seeking understanding and delving into context that I just love it. Like, it's just wonderful. You might need to balance things out with, excuse me, with deadlines where you don't want to get so into the context that you don't have enough for the deadline. But anyway, like if there's going to be a battle on the battlefield at a certain point, then you need to show up on the battlefield. You can't be still at the drawing board, right? But otherwise you can, but then you can plan more, even time into your projects where you can have more time to delve into context, more of a cushion. Okay, that will be good for now. I'm going to get some water here, and we'll do a little discussion, and I'll erase the thing here. And I'll be right back. Pretty funny, Chris, about the pig here. I'll just take a moment and just scan some things over. Something George wrote here sparked a quick little thought for me. The way, if you're that, remember I used that illustration where if you're like a president of a corporation or country or whatever, and you have advisors that are giving you information, and that's the only source that you're getting information from. And I'm using that as an illustration. I realize that in real life you would look at other sources. But it's a useful illustration or metaphor for how things work in real life, where you're only aware of certain options. If something is suboptimal, then you say wait, and that forces your mind to open up a new space and seek more understanding. So if someone's and then you develop more ideas of, well, what does suboptimal mean? Certainly if someone's property rights are going to be violated, that's off the table. So many solutions that people come up with that seem easy. As long as you can violate someone's property rights, a lot of things are easy, right? But you can't, and so you have to look for solutions that don't involve that. Of course, the story of OMG itself is that the only options that I was ever given for coaching had to do with this idea just didn't, as obvious as it seems, it just didn't exist, where someone who's actually making money currently is doing coaching. There might be like a guru where he's the only guy in the business, and he's supposedly doing, even then, that's always necessarily false, because a guy who's running an information product business as a guru can never really primarily be doing that which they're supposedly teaching about, flipping real estate or Amazon or whatever it might be. It's a full-time thing to be an information guru, right? You have to network with affiliates, you have to maintain your image, you have your website, your sales letter, you're teaching and fulfilling the product. Like, I mean, in OMG, it's like a full-time job just for Mike to be Mike, right? And then it's like a full-time thing for me to be me. and then you have Greg originally doing coaching based on what he's doing. That was so beautiful because Greg could just be doing what he's doing, and also just even personality types. The personality type to be a guru and a networker with affiliates and all that stuff is not the same as like someone like Greg who's just enjoys just getting his hands into what he's doing and really into it and so forth. So there really was no such thing. There was either just that kind of guru business where they couldn't really be teaching about what they're doing because what they're doing is, again, an information business, not what they're allegedly teaching about for the most part. Or there's like the coaching, the hired coaches where the guru makes a curriculum that the coaches get and the coaches just get a salary and they just coach. Like they do like phone coaching and then they walk people through a curriculum and so forth. And I experienced that. I didn't do it, but a friend of mine's girlfriend did like the rich dad, poor dad coaching. And it was just, a guy on the telephone who was going through a curriculum that was just hired. And so those are the only options I was presented with, was either a guru being a guru, teaching basically about being a guru, or something they did in the past, which is what Mike and myself would have been doing if we were the only people in the business and trying to do a business like this type of thing in this niche, trying to teach people how to make money. Or it would have been hire a coach that's on a salary and you give them a curriculum. And so, but neither of those was the vector in the right direction for the actual person who's being coached, right? The thing that makes sense, to me, it's always made sense from the point, I used to think about learning and how do people learn. And then I would think about success as related, because when I had the course on accelerated learning for 10 years. So it became obvious to me that apprenticeship is what you always really want, right? You want to be learning from and even kind of doing and asking questions, right? Doing it kind of yourself, learning from them, like a blacksmith, right? A blacksmith's apprentice. You're actually doing blacksmithing tasks, but then you can be corrected and ask questions of the person who's already doing it very successfully and monetizing it. And so the only thing that made sense to me was a sort of apprenticeship type of thing where you're learning from a person who's doing it and not just a recorded course, but where they can navigate you, you can get feedback and you're doing it yourself. And it's expected that you're doing it yourself because like if you're an apprentice, it carries the implication that you're also doing something. If you buy an information course, it does not carry that implication that you're doing something. You're just like a student. And so it reinforces the idea of you as a student. And when you were a student in school, you did nothing of value. Value is defined by your teacher, right, and a check mark. And you were never doing anything where anyone would pay you for it. I bet you got all the way through college if you went to college and however far you got, where you didn't do one thing for the school, if you might have had a job on the side, that anyone would have actually paid you for doing. All your studying, all your reports, you didn't produce any products, and you didn't actually perform a service during that time that anyone would want to give you money for. And if you give someone just a course, even if it's all correct information, you're reinforcing that identity as a student. If you have something more like an apprenticeship, then you're reinforcing identity as someone who's doing, right? Because a blacksmith's apprentice will soon start making stuff. It might be simpler than what the expert apprentice does, but when they start out, but they're making stuff that can actually be even sold and getting feedback and so forth. And that's what I wanted to create. It was dead obvious to me once I was aware of that was the right thing to do. But the first thing was to have the red flag of, well, these options aren't going to make any sense. The bad ones. And anyway, in general, the way that you deal with the situation in which you only have advisors that are studying the frame is whenever you have to look for things not to add up, or someone's getting hurt, or you are providing a product or service, but that has like things inherent to it that aren't really gonna be good for the people getting it. And then you look for how to make it good. Can we take all the things that are good about what we already plan on doing, but then alchemize, right? Look at the core elements of it, zoom in and ask more questions, and find a way to not have the bad that goes along with it. Jen writes, this is 45 minutes ago, but my understanding, you have a survival drive. If you identify with your mind also if you identify with your mind, then also has a survival drive. Your mind is a tool that creates structure. By challenging the structure your mind has built creates defensiveness this is a little bit written as we do online, a little bit while I was talking and everything. So some of the wording might have, if you edit it might be different. But the bottom line is, your mind is defending. I could have maybe expanded on that more when I talked about it. When you're getting that resistance from your mind starts out with this idea where it's to make you feel like you have a foundation when you don't, so that you can move forward. And at first, that will cause you a big problem, and your whole life has been restricting you that way. When you start to try to rise through that, you'll encounter that resistance, and that's kind of what I say. Like in one sense, that the devil is, without making a comment about actual devil one way or the other. Metaphorically, though, that's like the kind of, in one sense, there's the devil. Your mind was started or starts with something that's there to get you started, but it's no longer helpful and you have to work through it. And that is the idea that the foundation that it has is foundational. It is real. And it's not foundational in the way that it makes you feel like it is. It's like nothing to see here, nothing to see here, but there's definitely something to see there. Sorry, some of these reminds me to maybe look a little bit more at the Facebook group while I'm talking, because some of these points were in the moment. Robert wrote, very enlightened training, David. So many aha moments in this session. Oh, I'm so glad. It might have been a little bit disorganized this time, but I'm actually pretty happy with how it all came out, and I'm glad that it was helpful. But ultimately, the organization is a little bit more for appearances and to just make it feel a little bit better. It really doesn't have much of an impact on how much someone actually gets, because it's really about the organization the framework that gets created for you and in your own mind, which is going to be different from my organization anyway, and can't really be imposed on you, and then building up from there. I could use a little more perspective on money getting accurately versus default. Okay, I will consider that as I do future webinars, Dave. And Gretchen seconded that. And if you want to expand on the question, feel free to. Alchemy and getting the deep context and understanding is the most important part of being an OMG. It transforms everything and gives clarity and freedom with each step. Thank you, Megan. That's awesome. Always ahas when you speak. Thank you, Suzanne. That's great. What entity is the individual in the individual is doing the thinking when we ignore our brain? Okay, I'm glad you asked this. And I will specifically, I plan to talk about your mind versus your brain. Although, yeah, but I'm always kind of helping to reveal more about it. So it might be something that I'm kind of constantly chipping away at, rather than that I'll specifically have a webinar on it before I get to the I don't know what's true. Okay, sorry, so Sandra asks, what entity in the individual is doing the thinking when we ignore our brain? Okay, your brain thinks, or at least your mind thinks. You, as a conscious being, don't do things like think. You don't do things that involve like motion and complexity. You as a being can't really be complex. You can be kind of attached to a very complex mind, all right, and brain and body, and connected then to a complex world at large. But you actually need to be very, very simple, you yourself. You basically need to be one thing. You can't be a whole bunch of parts that are interacting and moving. You as a conscious being can't be a bunch of parts. You're basically an element, like one irreducible element. You can't be split into halves, okay, or broken into component parts to understand yourself better. You're just one thing. You are a being that is conscious, and then whatever flows from that. And you have a mind that is like attached to you. You get the benefit of seeking understanding, or you get the non-benefit or the drawback of not doing so, and then you just kind of get what you get. You're aware of your consciousness field. And you basically have like an on-off seeking understanding or not, in essence, as far as I can tell. And I'll maybe come up with some other things that I can explain. But pretty much, if you try, as I've warned many times in the past, if you try to basically, you do want to identify with kind of what I just said. You want to identify with the being that's aware of your consciousness field when you're trying to identify with you, who you really are. Anything else that involves thinking or even observing, it depending on whether you're doing it correctly or not. Sorry, I'm a little bit incomprehensible here in what I'm saying. I had a clear thought, but it's not emerging from my mouth very successfully. So what's doing the thinking is our mind. What's doing the thinking that's responsible for the part that leads to what we're conscious of, right? Like obviously, like the idea of a conscious mind and a subconscious mind has a basis. It's understood wrong in one way. If we identify with like the part of our mind that's responsible for what we're conscious of, that's wrong. But there's still a part of our mind at any one time is the reason for what we're conscious of, and then there's a whole lot of other processing that we can call subconscious. That's maybe related to what we're conscious of or contextually in some way. Just to make what I'm saying more tangible, the metaphor might break down here and there, and I might correct myself a little bit, but with a computer, there's a certain amount of processing that's responsible for what's on the screen. And then there's maybe processing that's going on behind the scenes that might not have anything to do with what's on the screen right now. But it might be like Facebook, a Facebook program might be running in the background that might cause a message to pop up if you have a message. But if there's nothing popping up right now, then that processing is not related to what's currently on the screen. So you have subconscious processing or subconscious mind where there's processing going on, and a whole lot of it that isn't necessarily responsible for anything popping up right now in your consciousness field. And then since you have a consciousness field, then of course there's processing that is responsible for what's popping up right now, just like there's obviously processing that's responsible for what's popping up on your computer screen right now, or what's not popping up, but what's appearing on your computer screen. None of that is you. All of that is different aspects of your mind, or different locations in your brain and so forth. And then Sandra wrote, and is that entity not being influenced by the context of society in the same way as the brain? No, it is. It is being influenced. What you need to do is slowly fix or build in parallel, a little bit like you can build a website in parallel in like a test area. Like let's say you have an existing website like I have with OMG machines. Then if I want to overhaul the membership area, which I'm actually looking at doing, then I want to build that in parallel and not mess with what's there now until I'm ready. That's kind of what I mentioned in the very first Alchemy webinar, is a lot of this you can kind of build this understanding in parallel and not kind of have it mess with your day-to-day life if you don't, to the extent you don't want it to. But at the same time, I could be operating on this parallel area. This is kind of a good metaphor. I like this. I could be operating this parallel website that's like private that I'm just working on to build out a new type of membership area and web design that's safe because it's quarantined, right? It's just on this other site that no one's using. But I might discover some things while I'm doing that I can immediately apply and put right on OMG machines that's live. That's great. That's a perfect way to describe what we're doing in Alchemy, is as we in parallel develop this kind of deep foundational understanding that can be almost disturbing or paralyzing while you're in the middle of messing with all of it and messing with your sense of reality and everything. You can mainly build that in parallel, like a website that no one's looking at, but then once in a while, or fairly frequently even, you can discover things as you're doing that you can apply right now in a way that's going to work. Just like I could make changes on the website that's live right now that are like nuggets from what I'm discovering as I'm building something on the side. So that's awesome. Glad I came up with that. And thank you, Sanja, for that question. And these types of questions could always be answered more and more and more by understanding more and more context and more what we'll cover. But as I continue each webinar, you'll understand this stuff about you and your brain and context and foundational stuff more. Brian wrote, America's foreclosure issue is a major hidden contradiction of laws, personal rights, and corporate rights. Still unresolved to the tune of billions of dollars after several years. Absolutely. Another one is the issue with healthcare in America, right, is that the whole debate about how we deal with having healthcare be affordable ignores some really deep conceptual things. One of the deepest things is medical licensing. And therefore actually licensing of medical schools, that's like a greater license to then get doctors licensed, right? One of the bottlenecks is actually, I think it's called internships. There's an internship and a residency, no, residencies, I think is a huge bottleneck in producing more doctors. So the supply of doctors is kept artificially low, very low, by government licensing. And then that's ignored. And I'm not saying that's even the deepest factor or the only deep factor, but just gives us a sense of, wow, if we realize that, and we're powerless. And it's in a lot of people's pocketbook interest to keep it that way and control it. Of course, context and control versus understanding, those very people who, like politicians, who are acting in their own like kind of selfish interest now, they're really less happy and less wealthy overall than if they got things right and had a better country that was more prosperous. But by acting in their immediate self-interest in the small context in which they're thinking and trying to get reelected the next election and so forth, they're artificially being restricted, right? And it looks like they're in control, but they're doing stuff that's even worse for themselves, so it's another metaphor. But yeah, just another example of how going out into context could help solve problems that are not that are insolvable within the restricted context in which the debate is overtly taking place. David, so perceptive. David, our mind creates a reality block designed to control our actions. Right, and it does this in order to help us, originally help us survive long enough to become philosophers, right? But then people don't become philosophers, and that restricting us and making us feel this sense of overconfidence about our overall core or foundation or context of our mind, that massive overconfidence that our mind gives us becomes, of course, very counterproductive, whereas it helped us survive at a young age. It helped us get going and so forth. So how do we get outside of our mind box? I'll be walking you through that as we continue. And I'm already probably expanding you. And getting you closer to the foundational ideas. I've really given you even several foundational ideas, but I'll reinforce them and make sure that we get them as the weeks go on, and as soon as I can, as soon as possible. And Michael was talking about the waiting thing that I put on the screen, the slide. Yeah, everything comes along in divine timing, firmly believing and attracting it. Right, like what we want to do is, see, that's the great thing about thinking of things in terms of understanding. The more we understand the greater context, the more we can make good decisions about when we want to wait and when we want to not wait. I could say take action, but taking action is not necessarily opposed to waiting, because we could take action for one thing and not take action on something else that we're waiting on. So the more we can take the right actions, the more we can frame and understand our actions and benefit from our actions in the right way. Sometimes we can, like it's easy to see with dating, so we can take action in terms of even asking people out or getting to know people, but try to think about quarantining in a way where it's not going to really backfire on us if they say no, and where it's not going to get out into the social group at large, where it kind of cuts us off from other possibilities. and so forth. So we can take smarter action, frame better. We can learn from our action better when we understand that we're doing it to gain understanding always. So if you're trying to rank a website, if you think the only way you can benefit from your action is if that website makes direct money for you, then you cut yourself off from the ability to benefit by just learning from. And also it just becomes easier to take action when you realize that, hey, worst case, I'm going to understand something. The alchemy as a whole is me taking action, but I'm doing it in a way that's framed for myself and for others, where it's relatively safe, where regardless of how perfectly I do things, there's going to be all kinds of benefits. I'll have a much better understanding of what's going to come out of my mouth over the course of 30 webinars, right? And then it'll be far easier to structure things in the future because I'll have all this data. And then people are certainly going to benefit from it to a large degree, or at least to some degree, and it looks like now to a large degree from the feedback I'm getting, because I knew ahead of time that there were plenty of things that were correct that I could share, and so forth, right? And I even did it so that there was a guaranteed audience, right? Because I was doing it at least for the people that are currently in the live webinar coaching with Director's Cut and Project Assimilation, so I try to have people come in and then only have, a few people in and not have anyone in the webinars and that sort of thing. So I did a number of things to make it kind of be assured to work out well in the sense of it not hurting me. I didn't have to I could just hit like a solid base hit, to use a baseball metaphor, with it, and it would still be quite beneficial without really drawbacks. Thank you, Michael. Don't quantify results, just keep doing what needs to be done, and the results come as a result of action. Yeah, and again, especially if you look at things in terms of, you want to have some sense that you're making progress. And by thinking of progress in terms of understanding things that could be relevant to the strategic objective, what people call goals, but you can also call it, instead of a strategic objective, you can think of your goals as tactical objectives. I was thinking this week might be an even better term as a tactical objective. So that can be helpful. Making sure the only effective thing is in front of me. It's like removing all other food from the dog when it needs to eat the kibble. Sooner or later, it's going to eat the kibble. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's one of my fallback things. Not even fallback. I'm really always doing this. I'm always paying attention to, not like completely and utterly where I like push everything totally out and get myself really hungry, not to the extreme, but I'm constantly using the strategy of mostly excluding things from context outside of what I want my mind to be working on, and also not kind of filling myself up with a false sense of accomplishment and such. That's actually one of the things where I limit my social media and even an amount of email stuff. That's actually what I'm doing, just so you guys know. It's not that I'm so busy. It's not that I'm not really busy in terms of tasks, but it's the main thing I watch out for, and this might be very helpful for you to hear, I'm not sure, but for me this is a huge thing that I personally do that I think is important for my personal success. And it might not be very relevant for everyone's path, but for me it's been very, very important, at least as far as I can tell, is I'm really careful about putting too many actions in my day that is going to give me that false feeling of feeling full, like I've accomplished something. So it's not the time that it takes to address email or other communications like on Facebook or whatever. It's the feeling of being full. Interestingly enough, now that I'm doing these live webinars, then I can more interact on email and Facebook and so forth. For about 3 months, I was pretty absent from Facebook, right, the group. And why was that? Because during those months, I was more doing like development, so I didn't have some kind of more external thing that was making my mind feel like it was particularly urgent and important to work on the ideas. So I still worked on the ideas very, very well, but I did so by like excluding almost everything else. Once I'm doing the live webinars, that adds a sense of urgency and importance to things where I don't actually need to exclude things, and so I can interact again in Facebook group and email. And in case that, to the extent that helps you guys. So especially when you're having to be creative and stuff, or if it's just you find yourself not doing something that you feel like you have to do day after day, that's a good signal that it's time to exclude other things that are making you feel full. And good. I'm glad I got to that. Hopefully everyone will hear that at some point, because that's a real big way that I do kind of the effective time management with myself. The other things work well for other people, so that might not be everyone's exact path, but there's probably times, and that'll be helpful for everybody. I wonder if this one needs a little refresh here. Yeah. Sorry, guys. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Definitely needed a refresh. I'm getting wiser to the ways of Facebook. Deborah wrote, asking a lot of questions is the key. The more questions you ask, the deeper you go into the rabbit hole. Yeah, and to your own question, right? You're answering your own question about how you delve more into the context. That's right. One logistical thing that I do, I don't know if I've done, I might do this a little bit more abstractly these days. I've done this kind of exactly tangibly in the past, is I'll write down a question, and it might have been that doing it tangibly in the past got it, so it's kind of habitual for my mind without it. But I would write down a question like, what else could I do to help move my website up in the search engines? And then I might start to circle the operative words in there and look to poke around with understanding each of those. So I might think like, well, what is search engine optimization, or what is a website? And I use I don't know if to call it common sense or whatever, but I'm poking, and first I'll kind of poke a little, not too deep, and look for something promising. And then if I find something promising, then I'll follow it through for a while. But now the thing with what is a website, though, that might actually be more helpful than it might seem at first, because you might think, actually it doesn't have to be a website. There's web, I might think more in terms of a web presence. And I might be repeating myself from something I've said at some point in the past. But anyhow, this is useful to hear. Just in case you haven't heard it before, right? So wait a second, it doesn't have to be a website. There's web presences. Let me think more about what web presence is, like blogger.com or a LinkedIn profile maybe, or something that I can, and you might think, oh, of course I've already heard about Web 2.0 sites and that sort of thing. But let me think, maybe there's, maybe I've been a little bit just operating within I haven't really taken that so seriously, and I've just been kind of operating within a box and just kind of doing that perfunctorily with getting some other Web 2.0 sites involved with my ranking strategy. Maybe I should start to think more about what is a web presence, so what are other web presences that are out there? And then I might think more about other websites where I might get an article on there, and how might I do that? That might be inefficient in many cases, but it might be very efficient when you're starting out. It helps you get more links. It's a real big deal to see a major success when you're starting out. Also, you might get a client that's particularly important, and it might be worth doing a lot of extra work in order to really make sure you nail it, right? You know, I talked about things are alinear, and people don't take that into account nearly as much as they should. Everyone recognizes that everything's not just like an exact straight line, but they don't realize to the extent in which that it might be really worth just going totally balls to the wall, effectively working for $5 an hour for some clients in order to knock the ball out of the park, because because of the potential with it, and because of what you might learn from doing so. So I'd be really careful. I've never profited from ever thinking along this advice is out there that, oh, never work for $5 an hour or whatever. Plenty of times I've worked for negative money, in the sense that I've had to like pay my, and you see this, right? If you're paying for OMG coaching, and then plus you have expenses for a website and then other things, services that you're paying for, and you're trying to rank before you're making money, you're working, you're not making any money, and you're paying money, but it's still exactly right to be doing. So I never think, oh, this is a $5 an hour task, I'm silly for doing it. Of course, there might come a time when having someone else do something is worthwhile, but I don't think of it in terms of it's below me. I I just think in terms of what's most effective. At first, it's more effective for you to do it so you understand it. In a lot of cases, sometimes you can outsource something that you don't understand. But plenty of times, I want someone else to do something because they're better at it, because I don't have the talent, not because I want someone who's worth less than me, quote unquote. I never think that way, but anyway, just some thoughts from that question. Oh, I was saying that I'll circle words and then I'll poke around. So logistically, you can write down a question in a notebook, and then you can circle operative words within that question, and that can lead you to some other thoughts and related things. And then you can circle some of those words, and you can zoom in, and you just kind of poke around for what's promising. And you can kind of keep an awareness or stop every 10 or 15 minutes or half an hour and make sure you're not just going off on a tangent that's not going to be helpful. But you don't always know, so poking around can be helpful. And you can quarantine that time off. If you're worried about it interfering with you taking action, just schedule a certain amount of time to do that, and then take more concrete or direct action within your circle of context, of smaller context, other times. Michael wrote, I had an obstacle arise July 1st and felt prey to the instinct of mind and reacted, knew immediately after it was wrong. It's been a few days to reframe into a different sense of context to save some momentum if possible. Also, the realization of recent events was the understanding of pressures having influence and being more aware of the influence and right. So you can have like a kind of a disaster happen or something, or time pressure causes you to make certain decisions, and you can be more aware of what those are and still try to make decisions that are going to be beneficial. Megan, exactly right, apprenticeship, right? Remember when I talked about apprenticeship? We were discussing that exact model today. Very cool. Rick asks, hi, David, is the circle symbolic, right, those ever getting larger circles that I drew, and the kind of the foundational outer circle, is the circle symbolic of the self-limiting belief system one has, as explained in Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill? Going through life without a plan and purpose leaves you susceptible to the devil. All right. Actually, probably not. I haven't read that particular book, but I think I know what you're getting at. So the idea, it relates to like probably like also similar to like an idle mind is the devil's workshop, right? And that if you have plan and purpose, then you can't be led astray. And in practice, right, like it can be true that if you take a teen who's at risk, excuse me, some sneezes there that I spared you from. If you take a teen that's at risk and you give them a constructive purpose or plan or task to work on, then they're going to be better off and they're going to be less susceptible to like drugs or bad influences. So that's true. But I'm talking about something different because and almost the opposite. Really, the devil is in the feeling of confidence that the plan and the purpose that you feel is right for your life is all you need, and you don't have to really think foundationally and try to figure out what's really going on in existence and who you really are and all that. A sense of confidence about who you are, there's the devil. I want to make it clear I'm not making a religious statement about the devil one way or the other. I'm being, again, metaphorical. Kind of using the colloquial idea of the devil, the idea of the devil, without any opinions or suppositions about an actual devil. So yeah, the devil is it would be following that advice in a certain sense. In feeling like you know who you are and what your plan and purpose are, then that's going to keep you from understanding who you really are. Any answer about who you really are, which has to do with, like, any idea that you have a core, yourself has a core, your belief system, your mind has a core. You don't have a core. You don't have parts at all. And anything short of understanding what I just said, anything in terms of identifying yourself as something that can be split into pieces or that changes, is a mistake. And it means you don't understand who you are and how existence works. And therefore, also God and God's purpose for you and everybody else. You don't understand it if you're thinking in terms of core. And if you're thinking, and if finding your purpose means anything other than a full win, if your purpose if you define your purpose and it involves other people losing, not even losing to you, just you're done with your purpose and some people are still have problems and contradictions and so forth, then you don't yet understand existence as well as you need to. How do I make preparation and context feel right is an important question I'm hoping to dig into deeper. Thank you, David Mills. Interesting about the halo effect as well. Excellent. So glad that, yeah, exactly. That's a terrific question to ask. I'm really glad that I came up with it, and I don't know if I totally did it justice in this webinar or not, but definitely got things started and opened up. You are the one moving between the parts. Well, careful, you don't move either. So you don't want to have an idea of yourself where you're moving. Shirley wrote, I love your examples, and going back, I assume, to the issue, questions, thoughts again. Right. That I go back to issues, questions, or thoughts again. Sometimes the second or third time around, things really click. Absolutely. You're welcome, Shirley, for doing that. Hi, David. Thank you for all of this. What's your take on the standard model of psychology where there's a subconscious and conscious critical mind, where the subconscious creates and holds the blueprint of the world, and the conscious mind operates within the blueprint or frames? And what does it mean to lose consciousness? I assume you meant lose there. Let's see. In one sense, this is correct, as long as you understand that you as a conscious being, you want to lead your mind, you want to seek in a way, you want to say, whoa, wait a second, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, and make sure that you lead your mind to get the context right. So the subconscious creates and holds the blueprint of the world, and the conscious critical mind operates within the blueprint. I would also say that you want to, in essence, you're leading or you're causing, your kind of nearly immediate place of leverage is what you think of as your conscious critical mind. Within that sphere is where your leverage is. And so you want to lead it to delve into the context itself rather than just operate within the context. And then you want to get the context right. Hopefully that a little bit helps. Every one of these questions, in essence, I could, is what alchemy is, not everyone, but a lot of the questions like this are sort of what alchemy as a whole is about. So I'm always looking to answer it further, but these questions help me do so, and they help me to get a sense of where you're at and so forth. So perfect. Debbie wrote, great call today, David. I have about 6 places in my notes to say, listen to this again. Many aha moments along with things I am close to grasping but need to process more. Thank you. You're very welcome. Francisco, thanks for being here with us, even if there were some issues that were brought to your mind that made you feel uncomfortable today. Namaste. You're welcome very much. Excellent. And the webinar just went great. It was before I did the recording, I just mentioned some thoughts that the Independence Day and a little bit sad in terms of government and so forth, and where kind of what government's morphed into and so forth, that were a little bit distracting me today as I tried to think about what to talk about in the lesson. When I kind of open myself up to work on these alchemy lessons where it's kind of operating in this kind of deeper context and so forth, that it's a little bit unavoidable. If there's kind of an unresolved problem, that it'll kind of or kind of an immediate kind of thing it'll distract me, just like it would, and you can watch out for that yourself in life. And mostly I deal with that by not exposing myself to pressing or problems that my mind finds fascinating, and trying to keep those out of my vision, so to speak, or my day when I'm working on these lessons. But with Independence Day, July 4th, then there's so many signals that keep reminding me about government, and government tends to fascinate my mind these days for a number of reasons. One is just that taxation is like a daily issue for me. It's just always kind of there, and it's always something I deal with every day, just kind of practically and then mentally and so forth. So it was just harder for me today and the last couple of days to focus my mind where I was wanting it to be. Deborah wrote, always a great Webby, great insights and hidden gems in each of your Alchemy webinars to help us move forward and get out of our heads. Our internal life essence is beyond the mind and body and indivisible. I think you are talking about what is classically called our soul essence or consciousness. It may be, exactly. Whenever I read people talking about stuff like that, they tend to somehow meander in some directions. Like they'll maybe call it that, but then end up referring to it or dividing it in some way, or giving it a sense of motion or something that it shouldn't. In what I've seen. But I may have, there may be people that get it right. Also, because we're talking about ideas that are correct here, or at least I'm asserting that for now. But if we stipulate that these ideas are correct, then some of the ideas will have been noticed by people, but there's a way that they're not put together that I've seen in a way that they kind of need to be kind of totally put together. Deborah wrote, great analogy, David. We're working on a static internal site. Oh, about the website, right? That's great. About the parallel website in Alchemy that will eventually make live in our day-to-day lives. Exactly. That's wonderful. Almost finished up here. Your mind has to make decisions without perfect knowledge. This is essential since perfect knowledge is not available. This starts in childhood. To the extent that we survive, this is a successful strategy, and so we continue with it even when we can improve on it, right? And you might be about to address this, but just in case, I'm going to be showing how perfect knowledge of some things is available. If we couldn't have perfect knowledge of everything, then we couldn't even have perfect knowledge that it was more likely that rape is bad rather than that rape is okay, right? If we even say one thing is more likely than something else, then we're asserting perfect knowledge that at least that it's more likely or more reasonable. So perfect knowledge of something would have to exist, or else we'd have no foothold at all, and nothing could be said to be known at all with more certainty than something else, and it would just, we couldn't move forward. We would just be, everything would be an absurdity. So we are going to be able to have some perfect knowledge, but of course we certainly are not going to be able to know everything, or even close to it. But there's so much we can know. One of the, in case anyone hasn't heard me say this, one of the ways to phrase the law of implication that I talk about is that if like to focus on knowing what we can know is true and just building from there, in like another thing that we can know is true and another thing we can know for sure. And it turns out that we never have to stop doing that. That in and of itself is effective, and we don't have to hop over into things that we don't know. Like kind of our brain will kind of take care of that on its own in essence, but we don't really have to worry about that much consciously. And there's all kinds of times that people ask questions, and they're trying to ask questions about things where, for some reason I had an example but it's escaping me, but it's inherently things that we just can't know one way or the other. And so, but they kind of want to know the answer. But the way to get the answer to those things, if we can find it, is to start to accumulate what you do know, and then see if the answer fills itself in. But we don't need to just conjecture about things that we don't know or can't know directly. And Neil went on to write, when your mind acts as if it has the context under control, it is actually using the subconscious. Like when driving, you can suddenly realize that you've driven 10 miles and not known how you got there because your mind was on other things. You're right. The mind, the conscious mind, or the part of the mind that you're like paying attention to, or whatever you want to call it, it is always using the context that, right, from the subconscious mind, right, that's in your mental model, your current mental model. a lot of thunder just now. Is the mind using the subconscious to take care of the context so that it can concentrate on more urgent things? Well, it's more like it can only focus on but so much at once. And so it would overwhelm something, you or whatever, to try to give you your entire model of the world at once and say, all right, what do you do? Or what's wrong? If the context doesn't change dramatically, the mind ignores it and assumes it's fine. Right, I'm going to think about what you said to see if it'll help me to clear anything up. I think I'm going to do that apart from the webinar, but there might be some things in here that'll kind of spark some things that to help me explain in the future. Western medicine is broken, and medical care in the U.S. is a huge corporate business that is heavily intertwined with the pharmaceutical industry, says Deborah. Yeah, I can't disagree. I'll say though that if I have a trauma, then I'll be going to like Western medicine. You know, realistic. It's easy to, and I do. I'm as critical as them as the next guy, absolutely. But they do pretty well with like trauma, right? Like things that can be fixed by cutting and patching and so forth. And there's a fair amount of stuff that does fall into that. But then certainly it's restrictive. And then, but really, and then I kind of, usually when there's problems like that persist, a lot of it has to do with institutions, government or pseudo-government entities. Like if there's kind of an establishment that takes over, it usually reverts to like survival mode. And it reverts to what's survival mode? Survival mode is ignore the context, don't rock the boat, just stay within the narrowly defined permissible area, right? And when Semmelweis, about, you know, the washing the hands guy with the germ theory, when that was outside of that area, then he was persecuted and told to shut up. That wasn't an acceptable place to be looking, but of course that was where, you know, where everything changed was germ theory and washing hands and so forth. Sanitation is where the main reason why the mortality rate is so much lower and people live longer. Thank you, David. I don't know the avoid squirrel thing. I don't know what that's referencing. Probably a number of you do. Oh, squirrel! I totally get it. I just got it. Where a dog is on one task, and then there's a squirrel, and all of a sudden he sees a squirrel, and he's just off on the squirrel. Definitely that as well. But even without being distracted by a shiny object, I'm not just talking about how you get distracted by shiny objects. Whatever you're doing, it's almost worse when you just feel like overall you're doing great in life and that everything's good. You might be fine, like within your little sphere, but we ultimately really need to break out of it. And there's plenty of people that are really operating in a way that's suboptimal for other people, like they're injuring or restricting other people. Even there's people that are like very successful and they're overall they're quite good people. They're not even involved with government or anything, and it's all legitimate. But they lack understanding and they don't explain things to their kids in a way because they don't understand themselves, and their kids just run off and end up in a really bad situation. And I don't even mean like inner city stuff or anything like that or overt drugs. I just mean their kids could take on political views that involve violating property rights. Their kids could just have all sorts of or the parents might believe in God and stuff, but their kids don't like go to college and start to worship their professors, and it's like a whole religion there, and then they let go of God and that sort of thing. And then so the kids just because the parents, even if they were pretty great people and overall, because they didn't understand things properly, and the parents would have had the attitude, come on, I believe in God, I know God exists, why do I have to hear what you have to say, David? What do I need to know further? Well, maybe because you weren't able to explain things well to your kids, as one thing. And then maybe your kids would never know God because you didn't take the time to really understand things, that sort of thing. And maybe these good people who are basically doing life pretty well, but they use kind of authority with their kids a amount of time, but authority in terms of like, you do this or else type of, and then the trouble is that's like a drug. It looks like it works great, but once the kids are off it, once the kids get to a place in life where that authority isn't restricting them, then they don't know what to do. And this is also why people have a hard time being an entrepreneur, is people are so used to their motivation coming from external sources like a teacher or a parent or authority figure, and then they can't make it on their own because they don't have that motivation, and they feel like, oh, I need motivation. But what their mind thinks is that it needs like an authority figure to tell them what to do. And then they'll be getting all these courses and hoping that there'll be someone to tell them what to do. And the course sort of does that, but you can't be an entrepreneur by being told what to do, and they have no idea what's happening. They'll go to course after course, and they won't have success being an entrepreneur they want to. And it all comes down to this this authority issue that they have. And it's not an authority issue that they don't like authority. They have the authority issue that they actually depend on it like a drug, but they don't realize it. And the irony is that those who have authority issues in the traditional sense, like myself, and there's even an article in the Wall Street Journal about this that pops up back up from time to time, where kids that are like rule breakers and have issues with authority, they actually have more success later in life, especially if they're entrepreneurs. So I'm very successful as an entrepreneur, but part of it was I kind of had to be because I have issues with the normal idea of authority. But be careful, it looks like you raise your kids so well and they're model citizens, but they're addicted to authority and being given feedback from authority figures that they're doing the right thing, and then they're in their circle, they're stuck with that, where they can never do anything in life unless they have that. And again, that's what I mean by everything can look so great within the context that we're in, but there's major problems that are invisible and don't show up. And a person can live their whole lives and die and feel satisfied and never understand what happened with their kids. And that if they had sought understanding, and there might have been a dozen people in their lives that if they had really sought to understand God and what was happening, that they might have led to God, and they didn't, and they're satisfied. And again, they were in my illustration, good in my stipulation, in my scenario I'm building, good people who didn't violate people and so forth. But there was so many people they could have helped if they had understood things properly. And maybe they were frustrated and upset various times, and God had to feel that. And so they caused God pain throughout their lives, even if it wasn't that much compared to other people. The pain that they did allow themselves to have, and then other people, by extension, means that God had to experience that same thing. And God's aware of what we're aware of. Anytime we feel bad and have bad pain or emotions or whatever, God has to feel that too. Fate, have you read Ken Wilber, A Brief Theory of Everything? I've heard of it, never read it. I might go check it out just to help have something to further fodder to explain things from. So metaphorically speaking, you are the one static interacting between the contextual understanding of the parts, mind, body. Very possible. That is getting, what you mean by that might be just right, Michael. And I'll continue to explain, and then you can further verify if you have it right. A question for the future, it seems, from Megan. Off the topic of today, but I would love to have understanding. Have you arrived at thoughts to help people to free themselves from extreme fears like PTSD, panic attacks, or trauma that affects so many people today? I think so, especially in combination with more like surface level help. It's a little bit like when you look at OMG. I didn't say to people, look, I have what I have, David, David, have what I have. I am just going to teach you this, and that's all you need. Instead, I based it with Greg and also working with Mike, right? And I had Greg show what he has. So it's a little bit like, I don't know, you could stretch that for however you want, but like WordPress and then plugins or whatever. But without WordPress, the plugin would be relatively useless. For some people, various traditional therapies can be helpful. And because part of the things in traditional therapies have correct things that they've approximated, they've discovered through experiment. But I'm able to help people get to a foundation and free. One of the biggest things that can happen with people like that is they can have blocks that can never be broken without the ideas in alchemy. And the fundamental idea of you are your mind, and then understanding standards and norms and how those act like super goals or magnets pulling on goals. If you don't understand that master key of the standards and norms and how those work, and again, to get to there, you need to be able to disassociate from your mind conceptually. Then people can have blocks that can prevent them from using the plugins, the more tactical, correct, helpful things that people can do. And I have full respect. Nothing's like I'm being condescending towards those tactics when I say tactics. I have full respect for tactics. I myself love coming up with good tactics for certain areas, but it's only, tactics is something that you're only going to have great tactics in a small area of life because it takes a lot of expert knowledge that you can't have in every field. So people can benefit more from other expert knowledge. There's all sorts of stuff that psychiatrists and psychologists know that's really cool that I wouldn't have realized on my own. But they're restricted. They don't know what I have. So both is ideal, and it's very possible that just through alchemy, a person can have enough to figure out the tactics for themselves to get out. And I've had some from the law of implication stuff and everything that I've done before, I've had some people, really, the you are not your mind is constantly what has done it. I had one person say that they very well might have actually killed themselves the day before, but the you are not your mind thing is what allowed them to climb out of it. Dave Keys, and suddenly all was changed. Oh, sorry, one other thought I had about the panic attacks. Also, what the ideas that I'm sharing with you can do is to let go of, it's sort of like the recession that we had in 2007. There was the crash, but then it was exacerbated for years after that and probably to this day, right? So you can have maybe a panic attack or PTSD, but let it kind of be quarantined. I used to, even several years ago, I don't these days, for several years I haven't, but even after I'd understood a lot, I would still once in a while, based on certain conditions in a video game that I'd be playing, get really upset, where I'd feel very angry for a little while, in a kind of safe way, right? I might just slam on my desk and maybe yell something or whatever. I wouldn't be a danger to anyone, but I would feel very, very upset. And it was interesting. But the way I treated it was interesting to me. It was clearly a window into something I was going to figure out, and it would help me to help other people too, once I figured it out and dissolved it. And that's how I looked at it. So it didn't immediately like knowing certain things that I knew, it didn't immediately get rid of it, but it allowed me to figure out other things. At this point, maybe I had those things figured out. But there's going to be things for me too that can trigger something where I might feel very bad. Presumably an extreme enough torture or whatever would mess with me, right? But anyway, it can help also, even before they get eliminated, to sort of react to them in a constructive way, rather than have it lead to like a whole series, a ripple effect of problems and bad feelings and guilt and shame and all that. Doesn't need to happen. You can read Dave's quote from C.S. Lewis. Excellent. It's a little much for me to read the entire thing, but thanks for all the sharing you do, David. Andrea writes, working every day to stop being so angry at the system as it holds me back from making money to pay the government when I want to make it to escape to a freer land, tired of being a human experiment. Excellent mind expansion. Yeah, it's nice to one degree, and one of the reasons I kind of struggle with talking about government is that in a positive way, or what I mean is that one interesting thing, it doesn't really get out there, right? There's not a lot of support groups or a feeling of that other people feel the same way. I think like a lot of us might really feel like we're really the exception because the media, even conservative media, so to speak, which is more against taxation but has other problems. And I understand, by the way, if someone's a liberal, I understand in the sense of being angry at certain totalitarian or judgmental aspects of people with other views, like conservative or whatever. I'm not saying that conservatives have those views or not, but I understand the idea that some might or do, and I understand some platforms of the opposing party. I'm not a liberal myself, and I have significant problems with various aspects of liberalism as it exists today, and candidates and certainly dividing people. But again, you can correctly accuse both sides of that. But anyhow, there's a positive way in which I don't want people to like feel alone either, and that sometimes like talking about it and recognizing that it's wrong can be helpful. It's one of the reasons why it's so unresolved for me is that there's like a reality to it, and like if someone was being raped day in and day out, or at least reliably every month or 2 months, then there's a way in which we would want that person to be able to function in life, but there's a way in which just saying, well, it's fine and it's okay, doesn't seem like the right solution either. Now, ultimately, the solution that's going to work is spreading like these alchemy ideas, right? We can't like kill enough people to stamp out all the bad ideas, right? We'd have to pretty much kill ourselves too, right? We're going to have bad ideas in our own minds. So part of it is realizing that although violence and self-defense may at times be necessary, it isn't going to, and it might solve things in a reasonable, we can't snipe at the idea of self-defense, right? It's easy to kind of live in a peaceful place and say, oh, we don't want anyone to use violence or in self-defense or protect us. That's kind of ridiculous to do that. So I understand and respect violence and self-defense, but it's not going to win the day. It's only like a holding pattern, as I've said before. But yeah, and I was talking to another LMGO in person, and yeah, they really felt pain about it too. A lot of people, I know Mike Long, I know myself, it's really rough, and there's many other entrepreneurs. Very tough to deal with. And I don't even know how, I struggle with it to this day, even in terms of motivation, I agree, because it's literally illegal to make money in America, right, if you look at it that way. Like, you then have to make sure you pay a tax. Like, if one person makes a bunch of money in 1 year and one person doesn't, and they do nothing, then the person who doesn't make any money doesn't go to jail, but the person who does did go to jail. So it's kind of weird that way. But, and there's some degree, it's kind of interesting to treat it this way. Something about what Andrea said. It's interesting, like, you know what we want to do is quarantine it, right? I mentioned that last time. I think the solution to this is, because if we totally ignore it, then, like this issue, then that doesn't really work, right? Because it won't ignore us, you know? Like we have to deal with it. We have to do our tax forms. We have to figure out how much to pay, which is horrendous in and of itself, and then we have to pay it, and more. And then we have to put up with people moralizing about it and writing, oh, we should pay more taxes than we do, which is bizarre. On the other hand, we don't want to get so wrapped up in it, right? One of the hesitancies I had today in talking about anything at all regarding government was I don't want to like get people just feeling morose and black, right? And associating negative feelings also with me, right? That too. Just even if we're commiserating, if we're feeling bad together, it still can get associated with alchemy. And it will be rare that I bring up government, I think. But so I don't want your mind to generalize it if someone does feel bad thinking about it, but like to alchemy in general, or to me in general. But and yet there's a way that it exists, and it's good for us to try to find a solution to it. And I'm still, again, trying to find more and more of a solution myself. I do think the kind of quarantining where we can sort of work on it sometimes and deal with it sometimes, but have other times when we realize, like if we realize we kind of schedule time to deal with it one way or the other, either taxes themselves or even thinking about it and what to do with it. And also the fact that we ultimately do have a plan with it. Spreading alchemy will at an individual level, right? And it's the only way that's going to solve it ultimately. Again, you can't kill enough people to get rid of the idea. We have to spread the deep understanding of why it's wrong in individual property rights, coupled with caring about everybody, right? The problem with kind of the general idea of Western liberalism is it sacrifices the individual for this so-called greater good. And what we want is greater good with full good for the individual as well, and not a sacrifice. And it's always easier to find solutions that, like now I'm kind of talking to someone who might believe in taxation for just a second, but also giving us a way to talk to other people. It's always easier to find a solution to anything if we can just trample on property rights of random innocent relative to that violation people, right? We could solve anything. We could solve healthcare. All we do is enslave doctors, and healthcare gets solved, right? All we had to do to solve the war with the Japanese was to incinerate a bunch of young girls and boys and their parents and children that might have had nothing to do with the emperor and his fighters that were fighting with him. It's always an easy solution as long as it's on the table to violate property rights, right? If someone tried hard enough, they might be able to find a pirated copy of OMG, right? It might have viruses, and it's probably going to be incomplete, and the implications of doing so would be very counterproductive for the person themselves. But there's always, it's always going to be easier as long as we allow for that. But overall, it creates drag and resistance and terrible things for the world if we allow it. So it's opening the door for it all. That's why I teach my son from the beginning the I don't teach him, as I said, not to hurt people. I teach him about property rights, and it's cool to watch. It's cool to watch it get developed with him and him to have his own thoughts. There was a funny time when this would just be a nice, encouraging kind of thought. He was what was I doing? He was jumping from his little trampoline. He has a little mini trampoline, and he was jumping onto a beanbag chair we have, and I was kind of making sure he stayed safe. And so, but he wanted to do it on his own. And so he was like, no, don't touch me, Daddy. Like, not in a nasty way or anything, but just like because he wanted to prove to himself he could do it himself. And it was going to be okay to not do it. He was like, my body is my property. Don't touch me. I'm doing this. And the great thing was that I was able to use that to have a little discussion with him in a nice way that he was willing to do. I wasn't lecturing him. We were just talking. In a couple of ways. One is I was able to show him the exception for keeping him safe, which I had built in from day one. I have two core foundational things for him. One is keeping him safe, and the other is individual property rights, period, for everybody. And I found I'm able to explain everything, all my actions with him, everything he might have to do, and whatever in terms of those two things so far. Okay, I'm not, maybe I missed something, but so far it's worked. But anyway, I had already talked about safety, so he could understand that if it was keeping him safe, then I might have to touch him. The other, and of course we're cuddly and stuff. I mean, everything's fine normally. He just wanted to try that on his own. He doesn't have a general problem with me touching him. But anyhow, but I also, sometimes he'll use his hands on other kids, right? He's young, and once in a while he'll want something or they'll have a toy. And I was able to say, and there was an incident that had happened in the recent past, and I was able to talk to him, and I was saying, and I used that to show him about while he was thinking about his body being his property and how he liked that idea, then I was able to show him how not to, and he admitted, like he's reflective, he's even for, but by going this way, he's able to see in a way that he reflected back that, yeah, like I need to not push other people for that same reason. And it was cool, and it's more strong for him, of course, when he feels it in this foundational way and gets to it himself, by being led to it and having the right foundation, than just the idea of don't hit others or don't push people, because it's yeah. Anyway, it's fun to see. But yeah, so about government quarantining it, and I feel your pain as well. And in one sense, I try not to. We don't have to feel bad about it, right? So ideally, but it's the one thing where that's the trouble with violating property rights, is that it robs things of meaning. Like it creates an inherent contradiction. There's nothing you can do. Like to not feel bad. It's as far as I know, there's a way that to eliminate all feelings of feeling bad, there isn't a way that I can see to not have some bad come that I can't avoid out of someone violating my property rights. I'm still looking for an even better, higher way. Sometimes we can avoid thinking about it and so forth, but there's some way that someone at some point, right, can just walk up to us and torture us or hit us enough that we would feel some bad, right? Almost no matter how enlightened we were, at least to some degree. I think that there's a way out ultimately. I don't necessarily think there's a way out instantly. That's why I say I'm not in a rush. So I'm looking to win ultimately. It's not like we can win instantly. Notice that God's self, has to feel bad now anytime someone feels bad. So God even can't not feel bad. So it's not about eliminating feeling bad right this moment. It's about getting there, right? And that's the problem with violating property rights, is when your property rights are not violated, then if you're feeling bad, there's a contradiction in your own mind that you can get rid of, and you won't have the problem. But when your property rights are being violated, there might be no way for you not to feel some amount of bad. You don't need to exacerbate it worse, but there's some way in which it's unavoidable to some degree, as far as I can tell. And like with the monetary violating with taxation, it's so hard because you need to give money some meaning for other reasons in life, right? You can't detach any meaning from money, but then the minute you give meaning to money, then it makes it more painful to have it just extorted from you and taken and given to your enemies, right? And so you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you the more meaning you attach to money, the more taxation hurts. The less meaning you attach to money, the less taxation hurts, but the less you're motivated to do work, the less you're motivated to like do things that involve just helping people that involve money, right? And you have responsibilities in life. It even rippled over to me with being really worried about having a child, because now I have responsibility to provide money, like things that cost money for a child. So that gives more meaning to money, which makes taxation more painful. Everything that gives more meaning to money makes extortion or any kind of taking of money, violating your money, more painful logically. And I don't know a way out that I can see. There might be one, but there's that kind of imposed upon you contradiction. And that's why it's such a trouble. The best I can find now is to not make it worse as far as we can. And I keep trying. Part of the car thing with me getting an expensive car was I was curious, like maybe by like having some luxury, maybe that helps me feel like, okay, I'm buying everything I kind of want, because I don't really want that much stuff, right? Maybe if I have everything I need, then that helps, and it does. I don't mean the car. They can backfire if you spend money in a car that you find you need to get free otherwise. But there's still some way in which, yeah, I mean, it's always just tough. And in America, you don't even just get charged a tax. You have to figure the damn tax out, and it's indecipherable, right? It's not even partially indecipherable. It's literally not possible. You have to go before a judge and have them actually decide your case before you know how they'll rule about certain things. And they could rule differently the next time, you know, so you don't even, there's deductions or things you can do and take that you can't even literally know. You have to just sit there and keep, in order to be safe, keep the money in a savings account or something like that, plus the penalty if they rule against you. Again, I don't know all the way out. But ironically, working with some other people tends to help, because you get wrapped up in kind of the group team thing, and you kind of get pulled along in the energy of needing to be part of a team, and you can be motivated more by not letting the team down or helping the team rather than the actual dollars. I guess things that make the dollars a little bit be like a result. I know people talk about a why, you know, greater than you, or it has to be more than the money. But the trouble with that you're doing it for more than the money, is that it's just factually, it's just false, logically false. Like there's plenty of things I just wouldn't do except for the money, typically. Actually, that's no longer true for me right at this point, because I got to where I have enough money by planning that out and figuring it out. But up until then, there were all kinds of stuff I would do that I would only do for the money. But I needed to, because I needed the money. Like, you need to make the money, as far as I know, right? I don't have a way to deal without it. So this idea of a why bigger than the money, there's a correctness to it, and like I said, but it really starts logically with you need to make money, and then you can find a way to have something additional that then logically leads to the money and allows you to take the focus off the money while still being pulled along towards things that make you money. So anyway, it sometimes even helps to talk about it, right, with stuff like this. And this is the plan. We're working on it. So at least we have that. We'll probably wrap it up soon here. We're going for 3 hours. But David, always glued to your insights, perceptions, and perspectives. These teachings are pure gold to a lifelong searcher here of improved thinking and living, and someone who loves reading. You inspire me to dig deeper. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, Dave, that can happen, right? I found that going against authority makes you stronger, right? Especially like in your own head, right? You want to be careful about like physically or legally going against authority, I presume. Like John Cougar Mellencamp says, when I fight authority always wins. I don't really think of it, of course it's totally valid in speaking, so we know what we're talking about to call it authority. I just think of it as like violent, like violent thuggery or whatever. But those people themselves, keep in mind, like I use that metaphor, again, it's always a metaphor if we talk about like devils and demons and stuff, but or even just the context circle, the people that are operating within this context of being thugs or obeying orders that from a government, right? Anyone who's like a government enforcer, they're like agree to obey orders to a person they don't even know who they're going to be, right? But they themselves just don't realize, like they're being, in many cases, they're trying to be good within their sphere, and that can. But when we see other people doing that, another thing it can do is spur us. If we see taxation and if it hurts us, we can at least use that to say, well, maybe I'm doing something maybe it's as bad, maybe it's worse, maybe it's not as bad, but I still want to get rid of it, that's hurting other people that I'm not realizing. Because these people, they don't realize, right? Fundamentally, morally, and this is why I don't judge people as a whole. I can judge ideas and an action of a person and what I might do. But all of us would do kind of what our context dictated, except for within our little circle that we operate in and that we can move around in, unless we get all the way to the foundation and build back up again. So. Oh yeah, I know. That's just amazing about when you see stories about lemonade stands being shut down and so forth. Just crazy. It's your patriotic duty, right? Exactly, as Biden would say. Great point, David. Great model to help our kids be free from the need to constantly look for authority, right? Instead, creating and utilizing the genius with themselves. Gold nuggets here. Yeah, absolutely. I'm really careful about. I don't really ever want to imply in general that I know any more about parenting. I do not believe that in general I do or not. I do know certain things about relationships that work for, and then the foundational stuff as like a nugget or whatever. I'm happy for people to benefit from when it comes to their kids. You're welcome, guys. Yeah, there's some way in which it's kind of irrelevant whether taxes are voluntary. Like maybe there's some strategy to not pay taxes or pay less taxes, but even then you're having to wonder what's going to happen, right? And people report, right, with the way I make money. I mean, PayPal reports and my bank reports and so forth. So I don't know. I mean, you could always go legally. One could argue that it's unconstitutional, but it doesn't matter because it's not about. Again, there is no law. There's just thuggery within, or the law is so vague that it comes down to who's going to hurt you or take your stuff, based on, reality, and just kind of do your best within that. Again, ultimately, my answer to taxation is spread understanding. And that's also why I have to talk about it enough to spread the understanding and to help you explain to other people. Hopefully I give you more stuff to explain to others, and then I hope I don't lose people too early that believe in taxation by talking about this. But it seems like, and particularly I guess with the type of audience we tend to have here, but it seems like I'm not hearing like people that are really getting upset with me for talking about taxes. I have to talk about it anyway, but it's nice to not drive you off before I can help you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful, and I say a similar thing. Like light always wins. That's why we can win. Is that light doesn't fight darkness, it just wins, right? If you try on a light when it's dark, the light just wins. And so what doesn't work, see, when people confuse light with like allegedly good ideas but within context that aren't foundationally understood, like you can teach your kid correct things and they can go to college and come out all screwed up because correct ideas that aren't understood foundationally can be defeated. But correct ideas that are understood foundationally will not be defeated. And that's what I want my gift to you to be, your gift to other people to be. Oh, that's cool. Actually, it is good to help understand the mindset of, I'll open that in a different tab for myself for later. It is good to understand the mindset because you have to deal with them. They're part of the reality, right? Like to some degree, it can help. Part of understanding the difference between a person and their mind is that you can see people. You can when you understand that people are operating consciously within the context of their mind, then you actually can treat people like machines in a certain way, in terms of predicting what they'll do and interacting with them and talking and getting them to not hurt you. So you can see people fully as conscious beings that you care about, right, while fully getting the benefit of understanding them as machines, right, by differentiating between them as a conscious being and their mind and predicting what they'll do based on an understanding of their mind. Like I'm very polite, of course, and so forth too, in most cases, except for that time in jury duty. But I was speaking out. I also wasn't, I didn't actually get arrested or whatever, so I cut it short. Great. Right. Fair enough. Taxes are there for control, and just like all these bazillions, right? You can't possibly find out all the regulations. They can always get you at some point. You're very welcome, Siaka. Okay, I will wrap it up now. So we'll be done.
Hey, David, this is Mike.
Oh, hey, Mike.
Hey, I wanted to wait till the very end, but I had just a little something to kind of interject. I thought it might be nice for everybody. Okay, great. I'm going to make myself a presenter. First of all, I'm always on these sessions at this point. This is very, very important to me. This has just been so uplifting. So, of course, I want to share my thanks, David. You guys don't necessarily know how incredibly hard David prepares for these sessions and for years, and how wonderful it is. Also, on the last session, you mentioned that we were going to try to get transcripts created, and I've almost created all the transcripts out of my own pocket, by the way. It's a little over $1,000 so far that I paid for transcripts for the first several sessions, so David's got access to those. He'll be able to share them. But I was working on this today. Can everyone see my screen? David, can you see my screen?
I can, and thank you so much for doing those transcripts, Mike.
Oh, yeah, you're most welcome. I thought that, with the kind of bittersweet day that we're having today with it being the 4th and so forth, of course, there are some great things about it, George Washington and such, and the Constitution. But then, of course, it's been a little bit of a heavy subject matter today, and I'm right there with David and with anybody here. But what I wanted to do is just kind of share this. I was working on this starting last night, and I did it this morning as well. This is a compilation of cars and houses that people have attributed to kind of like OMG cars or OMG houses, or purchases made with OMG money. And I just wanted to share this today because David even mentioned that he got his Rolls-Royce Dawn. Kim Kardashian, he actually beat Kim Kardashian to the punch. So Kim Kardashian is actually keeping up with David Mills in this case.
Does she have a Dawn? Is that a new thing?
Yeah, that's something that Cotton just reported. He said that she just bought it yesterday, David. So you beat her by she's really.
See, I'm ahead of it. If I can keep up with the Kardashians and forget about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep that information with capacity for now. But anyways, regardless, so I just kind of created this. I wanted to scroll this down, just kind of enjoyably, because the topic here is alchemy. And in my opinion, these are all vehicles and home purchases that individuals have come into OMG, and they've come in just ready to kick butt and ready to really buy in to what David's created for us here. And then they've turned that energy and their focus, like alchemy, into these wonderful, really treasures for these people. So this is actually Cotton right here. This is Cotton's Porsche. He's got a just really beautiful, and this is souped up. It's a Panamera. This is Jake Tanner. Jake's, I guess, 26 years old. He followed suit with Cotton. He got a Porsche. This is Alex Gould and his wife, Courtney, and they got this beautiful, huge house. Because they had the money, by the way, they were able to really get an incredible deal on this house. They paid several $100,000 for it, but it wound up being worth even more. This is Stephen Floyd's Maserati right here.
Hashtag SEO is dead. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. It's all over and done with. This is this is Ryan Holmes, his BMW. This is Gregor. He actually has a house and a car. I picked the car in this case because it was more recent. It's a beautiful Range Rover. This is Scott Schaff. It's a really inspiring story. He and his wife Morgan just picked up this house. He actually also has an OMG car. Martin is actually the king of OMG cars. Martin, by his count, has a total. He just got a GTR, but these are the 5 cars that came before it. So these are his OMG cars, all spread out for us. So thanks to that, Martin. And Martin's really the one. He kind of really a special mention because, in my opinion, he's really the one who kind of got me and then ultimately David on this car kick. It's a matter of a way of looking at things. Josh Orr, I just saw Josh the other day ago.
Thank him or blame him for that, but absolutely.
But, yeah, exactly. Thank him or blame him. I enjoy it. This is Josh Orr's Stingray. This is Hurricane Neil. Got this beautiful SUV. This is Brandon with a Volvo. And these are each very special to me. I'm very aware of these. This is Jarrett. Jarrett got, I think it was an F-150, something along those lines. This is Steve. I'm not exactly sure what kind of car this is, but I do remember it. This is Jamal and Jamal's Maserati. This is Cliff, and this is his car. This is Alex. I pulled this from a video. Alex bought a beach house, so this is from his back porch. This one, it's a little bit I'm still checking with Lonnie on this to make sure that this is indeed an OMG car. He just slung this up on his Facebook wall today. So I'm a little asterisk here. This may disappear. It might be something he's kind of renting, but it looks like a beautiful Ferrari. And then this is, I do really try to keep on top of that stuff, by the way. This is James Cluster, James Carr here. Actually, John Pemberton, or James Pemberton, I think, also bought a car recently. I just realized I needed to get that in here. And this is Glenn Ingram. He got a beautiful convertible, OMG ROI. So I don't know. I think that's something a little bit, if we remind ourselves of alchemy and so forth, and of course, there's nothing to take away from the importance of what we were discussing today with personal property and so forth. Just
no, it's nice. I agree. It's nice. Like one of the things, right? That's why I say not making it worse. The faster you can get your focus away, if there's a property rights violation, then mostly keeping your focus off of it, except if you kind of schedule intentionally time to deal with it, either to defend against it, defeat it if it's plausible, deal with it. A lot of cases it's not the battle you want to fight right then, and so you just can schedule time to deal with it, or just be done with it, and that's a good way to deal with it.
And David's helped me. David's helped me immensely over the years with with kind of sidestepping this kind of stuff. With instead of letting me kind of run off and rant and rave and really amplify my focus on things I really can't deal with right now at the moment. He's helped me kind of quarantine things and move forward. So anyways, also just a wonderful session today, incredible. The subject matter, this is something that David's been talking to me about for a long time, winning by context, number of different angles he's taken on it, but today was just different and special. And so I really got a total different level. I've been glued to my computer. Cassie's making a huge party, so everyone check on Snapchat. But I've been ducking all of it, ducking all the preparations, and in my office, really digging in with a spoon and enjoying every tasty morsel. So I'm glad to see so many people on, checked with things. And I don't like to mess around with David's focus. He was literally about to end this, so I just thought I would.
Oh, totally.
Just at the very end. Great. So thanks everybody. God bless you, and OMG is just a city on hill. It's a place where friends come together in Providence, and we're so grateful to have you guys here on this Independence Day.
Okay, I will end.